Hello, and welcome to the Liminal Horror Writing Seminar here on the Weekly Scroll podcast. My name is Ryan, and with me we have the fellows from Liminal Horror. We have Goblin Archives and Josh Demansky. How are you both doing today?
Living and breathing.
I'm doing pretty well.
Good. That's pretty much all you can ask for now. So Liminal Horror Writing Seminar. I know Liminal Horror's got a lot of stuff coming out. A lot of people are very excited for this stuff coming out. Anyone that can see the bottom corners of the presentation right now know some things that are happening. The Twisted Classics Jam and Hungry Hollow is coming up. So as far as what we're doing here today with the Liminal Horror Writing Seminar, kind of what are we doing?
So we got a little bit of a presentation sort of planned here. A bunch of stuff that we kind of want to talk through, more or less explaining how we go about writing and adapting Liminal Horror adventures. This is primarily in support of the Twisted Classics Game Jam, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But the general idea is that Liminal Horror kind of has its own culture play around it. You know, this isn't Call of Cthulhu. There are some things that we do a little bit differently here. And there is this breadth of like really great adventurers out there, and you can't really run them in Liminal Horror. You know, if you want to take Tomb of Horrors from D&D or something of that sort, you got to change quite a lot. You can't just like plug that in. I mean, you can, but you know what I mean? So we want to break down that process a little bit. You know, talk about how you go from the conception, pulling one of these original stories, and then bringing it into Liminal Horror. One, again, because we're starting up this jam, we know that people are going to have these questions, and two, because we have been codifying this process as we write the Liminal Horror Deluxe Edition, which should be hitting crowdfunding sometime this fall.
Ooh. So my what I'm doing today is pretty much just moderating while you guys do the presentation. We'll be bouncing the presentation in just a second. But I know there were some questions that were asked prior to us starting this today. I have all of those. We'll do those towards the end. But during the presentation, if anyone in chat would like to ask anything, feel free. If it's something that that would be nice to jump in and get some clarification on right away, I'll hop into the presentation and ask these guys a question. We can talk about that during, and if it's something that can probably wait till after, I will gather up all those questions, and then you guys can be with us here at the end, and I will ask Josh and Goblin Archives all those questions. So chat, feel free to ask anything that you want, say anything that you want, and I'll be talking with you guys and gathering up all that information while these gents are doing the presentation for the first, which implies maybe others, Liminal Horror Writing Seminar, adapting a mystery here on the Weekly Scroll podcast. Are you guys ready to go?
Let's
All
begin.
right.
We good? We showing screen?
We're good. We're good. We are on adapting a mystery.
All right, so look at this here. This is Liminal Horror Writing Seminar 1, Adapting a Mystery. Now, as we talked about, got a couple of things going on here. Just sort of reiterate that the primary impetus for this seminar, doing it right now specifically, is because of the Twisted Classics Game Jam running when it started 5 days ago, and will continue until the end of summer. Maybe that's August 15th, like we have it set. Maybe we'll extend it. Who knows? If you are coming to this video and you don't know what the Twisted Classics Game Jam is, for some reason don't know what Liminal Horror is, come find us on the social medias, because we can link you to the Liminal Horror Discord server. This is where folks can have the opportunity to sort of collaborate with their specific entry to the jam or learn a little bit more about the system. That being said, we have done the Twisted Classics Game Jam because of the next Liminal Horror adventure, what we're referring to as our Twisted Classics line, which currently only has one entry in it, but this is number 2. It is the Parthenogenesis of Hungry Hollow. This will hit backer kit in, I think it's 15 days?
Yep, June 3rd.
June 3rd. Oh, I have it listed as June 1st. It is not June 1st. It is June 3rd. This is going to be a new look at liminal horror going forward in the future. We've been working on getting a new like layout format and design, primarily because we have been given the opportunity to do a hardcover book with this one. So everything is kind of being custom built from the ground up for the hardcover. It's going to be, we're looking at like 100 pages right now. Art by Amanda Lee Frank, and we've seen it, and it's fucking amazing. So that's going to hit backer kit in just a couple of weeks here. So keep an eye out on the link for that. Now, moving forward, this presentation here is talking about adapting a mystery, but we want to talk about what a twisted classic is and what that means for liminal horror, because this really applies to what we mean by adapting. So a twisted classic is taking an old adventure, an old story, something that you love, that you're passionate about, ripping it down to its roots and twisting the ideas so that it could fit into the era of modern horror. The key idea here is that these aren't really direct conversions. You know, we're not taking Call of Cthulhu, flipping the stats for liminal horror and running it as is. Anybody can do that. You know, we have a little bit of support in the upcoming deluxe edition that's going to talk about stuff like that specifically. But this is really like, you want to run your medieval horror adventure in liminal horror. How do you twist that and change it so that it works for modern horror? So that's sort of the impetus for the Twisted Classics line, and also what you should be considering when choosing to adapt a mystery rather than convert a mystery. We talk a lot about this, about them being sort of old and classic RPG adventures. One of the ideas that we're kind of working through here is that's not always going to be the case. You might have this old movie or modern movie, a TV show, a comic book, anything like that, where the core story looks like it would work really well for liminal horror. So we want to promote those ideas, find out how to rip out the core and bring it to the table so that you can, you know, have your own version of that story. The first of the line, the official Liminal Horror Twisted Classics line, is One Night at the Shelterwood Inn. This is a little funky zine here because it's dual purpose. We'll talk a little bit about the impetus behind this at first, but this takes an older Warhammer adventure and kind of like converts it, and then we smashed it together with Triangle Agency, and we're calling it a day. And as we talked about before, our next entry in this line, the official version at least, is the Parthenogenesis of Hungry Hollow, which again we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, how do you choose what you want to adapt? There are all of these like fantasy and sci-fi stories that would all make really great horror scenarios. Just a little bit of a shift of tone, maybe a new coat of paint, and there you go. Bring it into modern horror. One way of looking at it, I've been watching this recently, so it's on the mind, is the television show The Expanse, which it was on Sci-Fi and then Amazon. That's this, you know, sort of realistic modern science fiction adventure. But when you start to break down some of the elements there, change the tone a little bit, and that story is horror. There's the proto-molecule, which is this unknowable alien life form that is suddenly manifesting and changing Earth and its relationships. So that story changed the tone a little bit, and you've got like a horror story at its core there. But like I said, the key thing here is when we choose adventures to adapt, we don't necessarily even need to pick things that are overtly horror. If you like the framework or some of the core tension at play in the adventure, you can take those, still rip them apart, and then add the horror later. That's sort of a tangential element, something that can always be interjected into these scenarios. So when you're choosing what to adapt, there's a few things to look for. Liminal horror and all horror works upon tension, being able to sort of establish that at the table and during play. Having a framework, an adventure that's already set up to do that, and you're golden. So if you have an adventure that has this naturally escalating sense of tension, it's a good place to start. It's already doing most of the work for you, as long as you can sort of adapt that into modern horror. Now, these are mysteries that we are sort of investigating here. You might not always solve the mystery, but that is sort of the core at it. If the characters know what's going on at all times in the module, you lose a little bit of that tension there. So look for something that is inherently a mystery. That's usually some kind of secret hidden by a facade, something for your investigators to go investigate. Now, furthermore, liminal horror is liminality. It's all about the precipice of change, transferring from what was to what will be. So if you already have an agent of change that you can adapt, it's another good place to start. That could be, more directly is the setting, something I'm working on in the background right now. There's this pollution that's spreading outward and causing untold horrors. That is an agent change that's happening in the background that's already natural we could build off of. Or you can look at that change as something more direct, something happening to the characters, be that your player characters or the characters in the environment themselves. There's a good one. This is a horror story. It's a book called The Troop, which has been sort of passing around, I think, Book Talk recently, if we want to go down that route. But The Troop, a bit of a spoiler here, as the main premise of this story is that there are tapeworms that are sort of infecting the subjects of the story there. And so over time, that's sort of like changing the characters and how it affects them. So that's something that's a little more personal. The environment isn't really changing. It is the people within the environment that's changing. So again, if you already have that framework, great. Use it. We can, twist it and add changes later. And then the most sort of basic of all of these is what would feel right home in a normal life? I can relate to a small town. I didn't grow up in a small town, but I've been to them. If you have a small fantasy town, that is still a relatable location. You'll still have your central hubs. You could make a fantasy town, a one stoplight town in the middle of, the Pacific Northwest. That's not super difficult, all things considered. A lot of these type of settings have human nature in it, something that characters can relate to both in their native fiction and, adapting it to modern horror. So if it is easy to make it feel right at home, it's pretty easy to make it feel home in a liminal horror adventure. We can have those, the back rooms or the parallel worlds that the characters fall into. Those all make really great adventures in and of themselves. They're not always the easiest to adapt. Most of the time, you're just throwing your characters out into those locations. But if you want to take something and change it and build tension slowly, another thing to look out for again is that ability to make it feel human. Now, to talk a little bit about what we have chosen to adapt, I'll start with the first of the Twisted Classics, and then I'll pass it over to Goblin Archives for the next one. Like you said, the first one we did was One Night at the Shelterwood Inn. What this does is there's this old Warhammer adventure. It's called Night of Blood, where the adventure takes place at an inn on the side of the road, and characters go there, and something weird is happening, and it kind of spirals out of control as you attempt to navigate the night there. It all takes place in one location over the course of a single night, yada, yada, yada. It had all of these really great pieces. So where did we find the inspiration? This came directly from listening to a podcast, Fear of a Black Dragon, where they discuss modules and review them as they are reading through and listening to Night of Blood. This is something I'd never heard of beforehand at that rate. As they're describing the adventure, I'm thinking, oh, this sounds like a really good liminal horror adventure, but it's for Warhammer. The idea originally came from trying to take that core, do a little bit of conversion on my end, because I wanted something to have in my back pocket to run on like a live stream in the future. As I started down the process, the folks at Haunted Table, who make Triangle Agency, were doing a little bit of outreach to talk to other designers and see about what they're doing in the space there. So they reached out and coordinated, and I was like, I got this thing I'm already working on. Why don't we mesh them together and we'll do a whole thing with it? I took that original adventure, I ran it for a few folk in the area here, had a little bit of a play test. the result was a lot different than where we ended up, at least in terms of like the core horror, but it was a really good application of it. But so the basic premise was taking that old roadside inn from the Warhammer adventure and then spinning it up so that it's this motel and a gas station somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. With the idea being that this could be a gas station literally anywhere as long as it's on an abandoned stretch of road. So source of inspiration could come from anywhere. It's not that I knew Night of Blood. Let's go. Yeah, Night of Blood beforehand and really loved it. It was just hearing other people talk about it and then find the pieces and then, kind of configure them into my brain. So keep an open mind. You don't know where your inspiration can come from when choosing what to adapt. And again, the idea is to twist these things so we can always add elements that their originals don't have. But what about Hungry Hollow?
So, funnily enough, Hungry Hollow also started from listening to a podcast. Between two Karens, they did a Gamer Blast from the past where they talked about the classic module N1 against the Cult of the Reptile God. And hearing them talk about it, especially talk about what works really well for that module, I had that similar feeling that Josh had. I even messaged Josh, and Josh messaged me back saying, well, I was listening to the same thing and had the similar thoughts in terms of how it was talking about the tension within the town itself. Spoilers for a very old module. About half of the townsfolk have been kidnapped and controlled by this Naga. And so there's this like sense of some people in the town are different and there's something going on. And then there are other people in the town that are having this tension between not understanding why things are changing and people are disappearing or coming back different, and sort of how that comes interplay between the two. And then you have adventurers going in to try to either figure out what's happening. Can they save the people? Can they stop the problem? And sort of that sort of tension between, can you uncover the truth, but can you save people? Can you stay whole? Which is at really the core of a really good liminal horror adventure. And I was like, okay, this would be great. And so Josh and I, what we did was I read through, and we'll talk more about how you go through and adapting, but like looking at the pieces of what I wanted to bring into like this modern small town, it just worked really well. And I found it really opened my eyes too into like, oh, you can really look at something, an older adventure or an adventure that's not set for a modern horror, and you can sort of harvest it for parts.
So you've taken the time, you've chosen what you want to adapt. So how do we do that? How do you determine what to save? Again, some of these things you might find that you can just do a direct conversion. You don't need to properly adapt it like we're talking about here. Easy enough. Read through the module, read through the adventure, watch the movie, read the story, immediately translate it to your table. Piece of cake. But then you have to ask yourself, how deep of an overhaul does your chosen scenario need to be usable? A lot of this is easy. You read through, you look at the locations and say, what can we save here? What makes sense in modern times and what needs to go? A lot of sort of incongruous elements already have modern analogs as well. So you don't have to do a ton of work to kind of overhaul those. The examples we have here, and we talked about this already, a roadside inn in a fantasy setting can easily be a motel. If you have a blacksmith, someone clanging away at irons, that could just be a hardware store. These are things that are sort of conceptually in the same realm, but don't require like completely reworking the idea entirely. Let's say you have a sci-fi adventure and the reactor core of your ship is sitting in there, and that's like a big part of the adventure. Maybe that's just a boiler room or someplace where the utilities are, something that serves a similar general purpose without completely rewriting its themes and elements. So start there. Figure out what you can save, what's easy to flip, and then start kind of diving a little deeper. Once you've established your the locations that you can save, you sort of the map, the places the players are going to interact with, then look at your central tension. Again, this is something that we talked about a slide or two ago, where um, good liminal horror adventures already have this nice central tension that's kind of set up there. But sometimes that's not going to necessarily work. The Night of Blood adventure, the central tension is that there are these it's been a little bit since I read it. I think they're like mutants or bandits or something of the sort that have taken over this inn and are masquerading for some hidden purpose. That could work. We could have done that again for liminal horror. But when we made One Night at the Shelterwood Inn, it was taking that core idea that there are these people masquerading as, keepers of this inn, and then spin it to work for something a little more modern. In the original form, when I did the playtest for One Night at Shelterwood Inn, these people who had taken over the inn were agents of the Bureau, where they were invested in keeping their cover while also trying to stop a creeping horror beneath the hotel. At that time, it was linked to the Bloom because I had set the hotel on the road to get into Coldwater. And we were actively working on the Bloom at that point, so it made a lot of sense to, sort of narratively connect the two. But as we teamed up with the Triangle Agency folks, it's very easy to just take that, spin it a little bit, cut out the Bloom references, just to keep these sort of conceptually separate, but then keep that core central tension. Instead of agents of the Bureau, they are agents of the Triangle Agency now, trying to contain an anomaly. Again, we preserve the central tension. Somebody is controlling the inn, and they are not the inn owners. So when the players go in and investigate, they meet that central tension immediately. And that's how it sort of spins outward. The core of Night of Blood was that the players slowly realizing that these people that control the inn aren't really the people that they say they are. And that kind of leads us to the next point here. Breaking down NPC motivations. Regardless of what time period you're setting your adventures in, a lot of your NPCs are going to have the same basic motivations. That might be wealth, money, power that comes with it. They might have some religious order or doctrine that they, pay fealty to that sort of drives their core beliefs, or they could believe in like the general order of things. So taking those NPCs, breaking down their core motivations into their basics. A lot of that doesn't need a lot of work. The cleric that lives in a fantasy town can be a priest, so on and so forth. Any politician or sort of corporate mogul, their motivations are going to remain relatively the same regardless of setting. They want that power. They want that money. So it should be an easy flip. Look at these NPCs, look at their motivations. For the most part, preserve them. You don't need a whole ton of work when you're adapting there. Just keep things as quick as possible and be ready to adapt in the moment if you need to. From there, the key part is figuring out why your investigators would stay in these horrid locations. This is the biggest challenge for literally any tabletop RPG adventure. Why do your characters care? You'll have to kind of figure this out on your own, but that is one of the most important questions you need to ask yourself. What is the reason they are there? We'll talk a little bit about this later because I know there's a question coming up, but this is part of the reason why some of our locations are so contained is because the motivation is the containment. You're trying to escape, but that's not always going to work. And especially when you're in a horror situation. You take any, even like Mothership, which is sci-fi, or you look at any of the OSR dungeon crawlers, a lot of your motivation there is going to be money. The dungeon crawler, you're going into the dungeon to find gold. Your motivation to stay is to enrich yourself for some defined purpose later in the future. For Mothership, it might be something very similar. You're on this vessel because you're in a contract with a corporation. If you break your contract, you're blacklisted, and then you retire to destitution or find some other laborious job that will eventually lead to your death. So there's that very much that monetary concern to kind of keep characters aligned in some of these systems. But when you change things to horror specifically, those motivations might change as well. Why are these characters continuing to dive into these horrid, awful places? Assuming they're horrid, awful places. Like, what would you say? The most rational thing that anyone can do in a horror scenario is to run away. Sometimes that's not going to work. How does that impact your adventure? That is a key part here. As you're defining your mystery, what is keeping people there? There is the player component. The players know that they're there to play a horror scenario, that they are there to play a game, but you don't want there to be such incongruities between player motivation and character motivation that it pulls your players out of the story. You know, we already have this level of suspension of disbelief that goes into any of these tabletop RPGs, but horror is especially important because horror is built upon player buy-in. As soon as you lose player buy-in, you lose the tension, you lose the horror. And then the final part, at least for this slide here, how will modern conveniences affect or change the setting? They didn't have cell phones in the medieval times. That is sort of the biggest concern when it comes to horror as well. Doing horror in, 2024, everybody has a little computer sitting directly in their pocket. How does that change how these characters are going to approach the story? If I could look up what does a vampire look like on my phone and like line up all these classic horror story tropes to the very spooky person who just moved into town, uh, that kind of kills some of the tension there. You take what could be Dracula and turn it into Twilight. So keep that in mind as you're going about. Your phone has the potential to completely upset any of the tension and horror within the setting. So how do you change things to make sure that doesn't happen? Easiest way, oh, there's no cell service here. This location is in the middle of the country, far from the nearest cell tower. You get intermittent service, so you can't use your phone. Maybe something is disrupting it. That's one of the things that we use in the Bloom is there are, I mean, it's a little bit of a spoiler. There are forces at work that do not want you to communicate in the Bloom. That's part of the horror. You call out, you can connect to people on your cell phone. You can look up whatever you want, but those connections are being blocked intentionally. Your calls are being rerouted to a new source. Somebody doesn't want you to communicate. And that's, a key part of the tension there, because you can easily just call the police, call the National Guard, call the army. Is it going to work? 9 times out of 10, probably not. You spewing some strange horror to the cop, trying to get them to believe you. We've seen enough fiction to know that that's usually not going to work out. And maybe in real life too. So keep that in mind. How do these modern conveniences change the setting? Beyond a phone, getting in a car, being able to drive away, being able to leave the horror behind. Something that these are just, keep in mind as you are adapting your adventure. There are a lot of easy fixes, but there are things you need to be aware of because, players are going to come in and break whatever you have prepared. So, before I move on, Goblin Archives, do you have anything else to add to this one?
No, I think one of the largest parts that Josh really reiterated was thinking about the why they're there and the why they stay tends to be one of the things that when we are adapting something or writing something, we spend the most time on discussing, really trying to get a few different ways to approach that and thinking through it. It's definitely a lens we always try to take to the work because it's helpful to, if you're writing for other people to run, it's helpful to be able to onboard them in that way. And it does change how we set certain things up. There are things added or removed that specifically are in relation to that question around why are they there? Why are they staying? Why are they delving deeper? And part of that is understanding your characters and the players, but then some of it too is just the setup.
All right, I think we have a question
Yeah, I wanted to hop in here. We had a question from chat, kind of going with more of the last slide, but let me lower my hand. Go away. Liminal Arc 485 asked, what's an adventure you believe is begging to be adapted but has a core problem that makes it difficult?
Hold on. This is something we should have prepared, huh?
One thing, I don't know if it has a core problem why it shouldn't be adapted, but like I know Josh had said Tomb of Horrors earlier and how you could port it through and all of that. There's something about not the fact that it's a dungeon, but sort of like the key bits and bobs of that that I think could be turned into such a fun liminal horror thing, but I think you would have to frame it really right. Um, you could have it just be a dungeon, but I don't think that would get at what's exciting about it. So just off the top of my head, I feel like that would be one that, with the proper thought and framing, could just be really cool as a way to burn and churn through a session, in an exciting, fun way. That would be less about the frustrations I think the classic module had, because when you frame it as a horror movie or a horror session, you get a little bit more leeway in terms of being okay with people being turned into bits and bobs.
Yeah, the one that I've got in mind here is let me grab it. DCC, the Chain Coffin. So this adventure here is something I've had sort of bookmarked. I don't think anybody could do this for the jam. It is, some 100 and something pages. Um, it's a big boy. But the whole core premise of this adventure is that it takes place in what is essentially the fantasy version of the Appalachian Mountains. Oh, that's a good version right there. Yeah. um, so that is already, you got your framework. Your characters are transporting this chained coffin across this environment that's going to try and kill them. And there's some like religious aspects to it. There's like cults and stuff like that. You've got these really cool core elements that are like, oh, it's just a little bit of a change, and you got that liminal horror, dealing with stuff like cars and cell phones and things that we have already talked about. That's sort of your goal there if you're trying to convert the chained coffin. There are some other ones in mind. I think Wet Grandpa is not really even begging for a liminal horror conversion. This is just a really good one to adapt for a liminal horror because it's I don't even know what the time period is supposed to be honest. I think it's supposed to be sort of pseudo medieval fantasy. But it's all about this patriarch of a family having died and then rising back from the dead, and how that sort of spins out into familial issues and affects the town and affects eventually the sort of the larger setting there. It would be very easy to take this and to spin it, to put a little more modern convenience on it and bring it up into modern horror. The other one I had in mind is Fever Swamp. This is the original edition that I have right here. There is like a remaster that Melsonia did that has been on Kickstarter. The PDF is delivered to backers. I do not remember what the state of the book is at the moment, but I have run Fever Swamp as a modern adventure. I used Agents of the Odd, which is sort of like very similar to Liminal Horror, just more of like a X-Files type of spin on it, I suppose. Fever Swamp is another one. You don't really need a whole lot to sort of twist it to run this at your table. I even wrote a adaptation for Liminal Horror that you can find on itch.io that's talking about ways to spin it. If you want an example of something that isn't going quite as far as, let's say, Hungry Hollow, but still takes the original fantasy ideas, because this was Fever Swamp, I think, was a Lamentations Flame Princess adventure originally, or written for that. or at least, BXD&D if it wasn't Lamentations directly, but this was some years ago they did this. Yeah, 2017. But to take that core fantasy presence, going into this horrid, wretched swamp, and then just like putting that in the southern United States and some of the swamps down there, a lot of elements really worked nicely there. And for those who don't know, Fever Swamp is full of strange cryptid creatures and primarily undead. This is going to spoil it a little bit. The central tension, since this was sort of talked about, is that there is it's called a pile, I think. Let me see how they say that actually. It's like the corpse pile, I believe, but it's like miles long horde of undead creatures that roam the swamp that at some point in time they're going to make it to the central setting that sits on the edge of the swamp there and destroy and kill everybody who's in it. So your character might not be going there for that particular purpose. When I ran it, like I said, I adapted it to modern horror and used Agents of the Odd. So the player characters were going into the swamp to find an old survey crew that had gone missing after, a storm had swept through. So their central tension was unrelated to the central tension of the module, but intersecting in very interesting ways. They ran into the corpse pile over the course of their play there. And eventually they learned that they needed to deal with it. So they went and found out the original place where it came from and, did something about it. Whether or not they were successful was sort of left ambiguous. But so those are a few that I had in mind. This is something that we can continue to diverge into on the Discord server once we have a little more time to kind of like think about it. But do you have any more?
Oh yeah, pretty much any loot gearing. If we're gonna be really honest, I always have felt like the Isle would be a really great, and that's all about how you frame why the characters are there, and frame why the characters would go down. And there's enough hooks in there that's already all within the text itself, because then I think it would be a really great, if you did it sort of like found footage academic kind of like framing in terms of touchstones of like why they're down there and how it just gets worse and worse and worse. But like I said, any loot gearing I think would be phenomenal.
Yeah, I honestly can't believe I forgot this one. I'm literally running the Isle right now in modern horror. So not to spoil it because you got to read this book. Fucking fantastic. Super easy to make modern horror.
Am I wrong, Josh? Or did you mention already while I was like digging in books behind me? Don't you have like a guide to Fever Swamp in Liminal Horror?
Yep, that's one of the things that we wrote. I think it was for the last game jam we did. It was like a year and a half ago, I think. I called it the Field Guide to Fever Swamp. It's really it's not rewriting Fever Swamp in any conceivable manner. It is about a dozen pages of tips to convert it to modern horror. So again, a super easy thing. It's not quite like a twisted classic like we would officially call it, but it was sort of the genesis of the idea. But well worth checking out. If you have a minute, it's on the Unenthuser itch page, but it can be found through the links of the old game jam if those are somewhere. Actually, it should be in the Liminal Horror library, right?
Yes, it should. And yes, it is.
Sick. All right, so let's keep moving on here. We can do more questions later. Save. Okay, so you have found your inspiration. You've ripped it down to its skeleton and you're rebuilding it for modern horror. How do you add the horror? This is going to be subjective. People are scared about different things. And realistically, as a GM, you're just going to do what you think is exciting, or at least what will excite your players in a scary way. However, when you're looking at modern settings specifically, something that's grounded in reality, your horror is often going to come from the juxtaposition of the mundane against the weird and uncanny. Zombies are scary because people usually, remain in the ground when they die. What this is going to be really specific to your adventure. the easiest thing is terrifying creatures, you know, like some horrid beast is stalking the forest, or even like a Freddy or a Jason. It is just some man going out there and is going to kill you. Again, that is sort of inherently terrifying in its own nature. But your horror could also be otherworldly entities. The big thing in the Bureau is there are creatures and, well, specifically one entity that is attempting to break the bind between the prime material plane and whatever other plane that holds its home, and it's working its way into our world, and that is spreading this inherent corruption throughout the building that is changing people to be more like the entity itself. So that's something from another world that's interjecting its way into ours. But beyond that, you've got the classics like the ghosts and the demons. Real easy to go into, especially if you want to do like the demonic thing. You can always add the religious angle to it, and religious horror is its own subcategory that people seem to enjoy. And above all, your horror can just be other humans. This is part of the core tension in a lot of the modules. It's how the other people you are with react to the horror, and how your characters then respond to their acting. A lot of, let's talk about the Bloom for a second here. There are a bunch of NPCs in the Bloom. We've identified some of the key ones, and those are the ones that have the most ability to affect change within the setting, but there are also people just all sort of scattered around. The big thing about the Bloom is that a lot of your NPCs aren't going to do anything about the horror. They are intentionally trying to ignore it for sake of keeping the pleasant nature of their town intact. So you will come to them with claims and beg for help, and they're like, no, nothing is happening here. It's all fine, up until the point where it slams them into the face and everybody freaks out. So again, that's part of your central tension there. That's all human driven tension, only tangentially related to the monsters themselves. Now, for liminal horror specifically, we use the horrors as agents of change. At a very minimal level, change could simply be making your character go from alive to dead. But that change could also be something more profound. You know, we talked about previously about how the environment can be changed. You know, talking about the Bloom again, there is this spreading fungal mass that is terraforming the town, you know, to make it more covered in this fungal agent. So the horror itself is based in nature, but it is horrifying because of what it is doing. It is changing the environment. But the horror, more specifically, more mechanically in the middle horror, will change your character. You know, we see that through Fallout, which is one of the most important parts of the system. That is how your characters are directly changed by these horrors. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but that's worth keeping in mind, that that is the goal, is to create a change through horror. That is liminal horror. Now, I've already sort of covered this a little bit. Horrors should both be environmental and personal, threaten the setting and threaten the investigator. I've been playing Silent Hill recently, you know, the original 3, just to kind of check that off because I've never had a chance to until recently. Silent Hill works really well because the town of Silent Hill changes over the course of play. The entire place is sort of this, you know, nightmare escape to begin with, but your character will walk through a door, and when they walk back out, it's another world entirely, you know, based upon the real one, but things have changed. They use all those, you know, it's dark, shitty hallways and fences to represent what the other world is there, but either way. The environment in that game is also a reflection of the person, so that's a different aspect there too. But so the environment, they don't always need to change. It is just a good touch. It makes you're sort of setting the themes of your horror and your adventure, and you're making it apparent by changing the setting in and of itself. Sometimes it is horrifying that the setting does not change as well, so keep that in mind. And then, like I already talked about it, horrors are personal. You know, it's threatening someone's life, your own as your character, the ones that you love, your family and friends, or even just the people in your town. You have some degree of care for them, otherwise you wouldn't be living there. So the horror is threatening. Through that, what you do is you begin to create clear consequences of an action. If the horror is slowly changing the environment, if you do not stop it, the environment will be changed. In the bloom again, if you do not stop the bloom, Coldwater will be overrun by the end of the adventure. And based on some of the potential consequences there, Coldwater may no longer exist at the end of the adventure if the horror is allowed to proceed. And again, when it comes to the personal level, if you do nothing as your character, you will be changed through fallout or death. But also that same threat is to all of the people you have connections with. Now, beyond that, your horror should have a goal. What does it want? What happens when it gets what it wants? Horror should rarely be random. And I mean truly random. When it comes to something like the bloom, the horror at the heart of the adventure doesn't really want anything tangible in terms of material goods. The horror wants to do what all fungus does, grow and propagate. It has a goal, and that goal is to spread and to consume. It may seem random because it is nature, it's not a person or a being, but that is its core premise. That goal informs how we built the adventure. Because the fungus wants to do what fungus does, it's going to consume the town. You can see the easy points of connection here. Beyond that, again, your horror could be specifically focused. Scientists were looking to find ways to revive the dead or, something of the sort, preserve the brain after somebody has passed away in order to pass it on into a new body, and that creates zombies. The zombies themselves may have been goalless. They do a basic goal, and that's, eat brains or eat human flesh, yada, yada, yada. But it is the source of the horror that had the goal to begin with, find ways to, revive life and solve the problem of death. Something of that sort. That is the goal that drives the horror at the core of your adventure. So, and my favorite, find a theme. What it does is it gives you this really easy element to return to when you're running low on ideas and you want to add additional horror to your adventure. In Hungry Hollow, for example, one of our key themes is spring, sort of broadly and generally, and what that comes with is, bees and fertility. We can take those two core concepts, those themes and ideas, and then just add them everywhere. It's things that are calling back to the horror of the adventure without even overtly being horrifying. The central tension of Hungry Hollow, and this isn't even much of a spoiler of what's to come, is that there is a baby shower that's going to happen in some days from when you arrive at the town itself. So this event is sort of looming in the background, but because we have that core theme of fertility, we can kind of expound upon that. There are flyers all over town talking about this baby shower. People are excited about this event. We can add in the motifs of spring, of flowers and bees and all those things, and they could decorate banners that sit in the town. Again, these things aren't overtly horrifying, but they are starting to key your players into what might be going on beneath the surface. Another one of the big ones is in all of Call of Cthulhu horror, there's always some cult that has a symbol on their book. The Necronomicon's got that little seal on it. That can be your theme. You put that symbol somewhere in the environment, and then the players automatically see there's a cult presence here. Let's go find the cult. Another one is Robert Chambers' The King in Yellow, the sort of impetus for a lot of Lovecraft's early work, inspiring the very Lovecraftian genre. The King in Yellow is a very easy theme. That is yellow. So you can introduce that, a character with a yellow cloak. It immediately stands out as being sort of different because of its color nature, but also you can start making yellow things in your adventure. One, because you're trying to direct attention, and two, because you were trying to screw with your players a little bit. Like you can put a yellow post-it note on a door or something like that. They see the color yellow and go, oh, blah, 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 let's go investigate. And there's nothing really there. So that helps build tension. It helps kind of like, the ebb and flow. All clues aren't created equal in that sense. I think that's all I have to say on this one. Anything to add?
No, I think the choosing of themes and choosing of goals are two, not only for writing, but for running liminal horror games. And sometimes the themes come in play and you start to realize what your players start to glom onto, and you can weave them through, but it definitely helps create a cohesive vision throughout. It is definitely worth paying really close attention to early on in your writing. So what is their goals? What are they trying to achieve? And then how can I weave some sort of aesthetic or thematic elements throughout?
All right, let's move on. Writing clues. One of the hardest problems in all of tabletop RPG. Writing mysteries and the clues to go along with it. You'll see this kind of handled in a bunch of different ways. Liminal Horror takes a little more traditional structure. I'll talk about that in a second, where you find the clues and you solve the mystery. But this is a problem that has spawned discourse. It's so sort of inherently difficult to nail down. You'll look at stuff like Gumshoe. Gumshoe is a system, just kind of gives you the clues if you look for them. Or Cthulhu Dark, that's another one where if you're looking for clues, you will find them. It's just sort of like how you find them that affects what you do next. And then you even have the Brindlewood Bays and, the Carve from Brindlewood systems, where you can find a clue at any of these key locations, and the very nature of the mystery is fluid. So you're looking for clues, and then you decide what the mystery is at the very end. All of these things are attempting to find the same goal. That's to make this process easier, because it's not easy. Now, the key part that makes Liminal Horror fun, it's not really a game about solving mysteries. It's about surviving those mysteries. Clues are one of your tools that the players will have at their disposal, and that's how they inform their choices on what to do next. One of the key pieces of designed influence that both Goblin Archives and I have used is this blog post from Sean McCoy of Mothership fame. It's called Survive, Solve, Save, where the general premise, and this has changed a little bit since the original blog post, because I think it was back in like 2017 or something like that. So it's been a few years. But the core premise is that your characters in a Mothership adventure will be able to do one of these things. They will survive the encounter, they'll solve the mystery, or they'll save themselves or the people affected by the horror. Maybe you'll be able to do 1.5 of those things. You'll get some of the answers to the mystery while also living to see it yourself. Or you could survive all the way up into the end. You get the answers. Maybe you save people, but you set off that nuke that blows up the power plant, taking you and the Xenomorph Queen away with it. But things are going to be messy. And horror is rarely, I'm not going to say good because that's subjective. Things should rarely be clean and cut and dry by the end of your adventure. So you don't really need to worry about setting up this big, expansive trail of breadcrumbs with all of these clues so that the players themselves put on their Sherlock Holmes cap and solve the mystery themselves and save everybody. That's clean. We don't want clean. We want things to be messy. So use clues as tools. With that in mind, when you are writing your clues, do not hide them. Players should be given adequate information in order to make informed choices, and those choices should be impactful. If you are hiding clues behind roles, in a general sense, like Liminal Horror doesn't even have the find the clue role. We have saves, not even like skill checks or anything like that. So if the players act in a manner that would find one of the clues you have prepared, they find that clue. If they search the desk and find the letter of the mayor who is secretly funding a religious cult or something like that, they've searched the desk, they found the clue. We don't need to make a strength save to open the desk to find the clue or anything like that. They can simply do so. So your clues, you want them to be findable. The goal is not to obscure it. With that in mind, your progress in the adventure should never be halted by not finding a clue. The player should always have choices ahead of them, things that they could be doing. If they need to find one specific clue to progress, then the adventure has sort of failed. Your characters are locked in the sense of indecision. They don't know what they're missing, even if you as a GM do. So finding ways to ensure that they can continue to move forward and to act without having a specific clue is only going to be beneficial. We'll talk about the Doom Clock later. That is sort of Liminal Horror's mechanical solution to the problem, where something is always going to happen next for the players to react to. But that's one possible solution. There are, plenty of others that you can kind of look into and experiment with. Writing clues, as we talked about, that can only be found in those specific sequences that largely won't be found by player groups. When you're writing these adventures for other GMs, like if you're going to release it, that's not really going to be helpful. The obscure things that 1% of the player group are going to find, having some of that stuff is fun, sure, but all you're doing is creating this flow of information that the GM needs to keep in mind and need to consider when you're writing something that doesn't really need to be considered because virtually no one's going to find it. So keep that in mind. Having your Easter eggs, having your, fun little puzzles and stuff like that is good. Keep those in there, but don't obscure it so much that it becomes useless information. Your modules and your adventures should reflect what's going to happen during play under most normal circumstances. So don't worry about getting too clever with it, all things considered. And keep in mind, some of your clues might be best as fluid in nature. This is, you can pick them up and drop them down wherever you might need them. Some clues are so important that they're linked to a specific location, and good, great, keep those, but also keep in mind that you can add flavor and change the adventure as it's written while you are playing it. We do this more formally and mechanically through the Voidcrawl. We'll talk about that later again. But the general idea is like you're trying to link the mayor to that cult again, and you need the players to start making that connection so they can continue to move forward before the town is destroyed by the cult or something of the sort. Clues that link the mayor to the cult don't need to be directly in the mayor's office. They could be at the receptionist desk or at the church or something of the sort. These are things that you want your players to find. You want them to progress. So the clues don't need to be specific locations to be viable. And it helps keep things sort of moving at the table. You're not playing a story. You are running a horror scenario. So even the GM, you want to be a little surprised by how things are going. The Voidcrawl keeps that as a random nature. But again, you don't need to rely on that. You can just have a nice list of things at your disposal, ready to drop in as you see it fit. And again, we want players to have the information so that they can act. We want them to have things in their toolbox, so we don't need to be so strict with where they end up. Before we continue, anything else to add here?
I usually frame it, in while we are writing it, and then towards the end as well, how can you draw those red strings between locations and things? And so when you look through your manuscript or whatever you're writing in whatever format, making sure there are ways to connect players and characters and things around that sort of redundant nature. That is how life is anyways, right? There's a lot of ways that things are connected to each other. So a lot of times we'll go through and we'll read through locations and characters and things and see where we need to seed more connections or clues in a way to make sure that there's an ample opportunity for players to pull on those threads and then put them together and make meaning in them in them in their own way. And oftentimes it's in unique ways that you are surprised by. As someone who runs everything I've written in terms of liminal horror adventures, I'm constantly surprised by the connections and the twists and turns that the characters pick up or clue into, and then takes them down a different rabbit hole.
All right. Let's press on. Now, talking about the system aspects of it, everything we talked about so far is mostly narrative. You know, it's the prose you're writing, is how you're setting up the settings. So let's interact with Liminal Horror as a system. Two of the most important parts of play are stress and fallout. We'll talk more about fallout specifically, but fallout is linked to stress, so it is worth bringing up here. Stress itself is a representation of the horrors having a tangible effect on your characters. We know that stress is an agent of change. It will eventually lead to fallout if your characters are not careful. So keep that in mind as you are writing down or figuring out how to dole out stress. In a basic sense, one stress is easy to hand out. You're witnessing something horrid. One stress on its own is rarely going to create fallout, especially if you are in an environment. Let's say you're searching a location and you see a spooky body. And you're like, oh no, a spooky body. You take one stress. This is sort of a key part of maintaining tension. Mechanically, this means nothing. You know, taking one stress when you're in a relatively safe location with no adversary coming at you, you take a few minutes to rest and your hit protection returns to full. So it might seem a little superfluous to hand out stress in this increment at those type of times, but keep in mind that this is how we help pacing and tension at the table. It is the ritual of the player marking down their hit protection to know that they aren't safe, that things are starting to get a little creepy. So keep that in mind. Even if the players can heal one stress very quickly with only a few moments of rest, it is still useful to have these moments baked in. You know, opening the dumpster and smelling the wretched trash that lies in there, that's going to cause stress to anyone. So keep those moments in. But also, like I said, stress is an agent of change. Horrors can dole out stress directly. This is typically through their abilities that the horrors have themselves. You know, like a zombie bites you and you're infected with the virus. So we mechanically represent that by stress, sort of coursing through your veins as you are slowly being turned into a zombie, or at least at risk of being turned into a zombie through their bites. In the Bureau, stress is more of a representation of the corruption that is inherently at play within the monolith. They're sort of slowly infecting your characters, trying to worm its way in and corrupt them as well. When we get to the Bloom, stress is the fungal infection worming its way and trying to take control of your system. By being in cold water, you're already exposed to the spores that kind of are pervasive in the area. The more stress you take, the more your body is going to start pumping through and distributing those spores, and more like protection you're losing against it because you're spending all this time there and you're getting worked up. And so as the stress builds up, the fungal infection is going to start to build as well. So stress can mean a lot of different things to your adventure other than how we view it as being, you know, like an anxiety response. So 1d4 stress, easy baseline for monsters. If you have major horrors, you know, like the big brutes that you might have, or anything that has like a particularly weird or gross ability, give it 1d6 stress, easy enough. And then when you go to 1d8, 1d10, 1d12 stress, make sure that those things are particularly monstrous entities, or you're sort of witnessing these events not meant for human eyes. When you get into the levels of 1d8 stress, those have the ability to cause fallout in a single roll. So again, keep your design intentions in mind when you're doling out stress in that high of quantities. Seeing Cthulhu himself is probably something that's very frightening to human eyes and might force inherent change within you as you are frightened by its very sight. That's probably worth a D10 or D12. Or opening the tome of a necromancer and having its spells seared into your very brain. Again, something not meant for you, not meant for you to witness. So it is going to change you as a result because of your carelessness. Anything to add?
No, it just really, stress is how we mechanically show how the horrors change your character, leading straight into Fallout, which is the other mechanical way on your character sheet that your character shifts and change and becomes less like a normal person and more like what they are investigating and fighting.
All right, let's keep going. All right, getting deeper into the stat blocks here. I'll be pretty quick about this one. I don't think we need to spend a whole ton of time here, but stat blocks are a minor part of most of your characters, most of the horrors that you face. A lot of the horrors, they are horrifying for their narrative aspects, and stat blocks are at their most useful when you're in combat, which is something that you generally want to avoid in a horror system because it means your characters have a pretty good chance of dying or at least being harmed in some form. So when you're looking at stat blocks, you don't have to get too deep into the weeds about it. Most creatures, if the only thing they're going to be doing is fighting, give them a strength score, give them hit protection. Strength is their meat points, hit protection is their ability to avoid serious harm. 90% of your interactions with these creatures are going to be with those two stats. If you end up needing dexterity or control for anything, these creatures you didn't have statted already, assume it's 10. It's easy enough. You don't even need to write it down. Just think anytime it's not listed, it's 10. There you go. There's your creature. A zombie, give them 4 HP, 12 strength. That's a zombie. They try and bite you. They cause stress. Easy. When looking at general ability scores, 10 is going to be your average point. A normal human has 10s across the board, which is variable based on the specific human. But so 10 is your average. It's about a 50% chance of success at any given save. And then we adjust upward from there. 3 is truly deficient. Might be reserved for creatures or particularly untalented individuals. 6 is a bit of a weaker score, but somewhere kind of in the middle. It's not strange to see like a standard investigator with a score of 6 or so. Then we get into beyond 10. When you look at 14 in any of your ability scores is starting to get into the sort of the noteworthy point. You are exceptional at that one particular ability. And then 18 is the maximum that any character can have, any investigator, regardless of fallout you receive or what have you. 18 is your maximum that you can have. That is sort of like you are extraordinarily gifted in that. And that goes for creatures as well, considering these stat blocks here. 18 is a truly legendary monster. It is a horrid thing. But then there are the higher rates. If you have some eldritch god, don't give them stats at all. They're an eldritch god. You're not going to fight your way out of, doing that without something else happening in the narrative. You can't shoot Cthulhu with a gun and expect him to die. So these horrid eldritch monstrosities might have scores of 20 or higher, depending on whether you want to represent that mechanically. But getting into hit protection, again, hit protection is your ability to avoid serious harm. Most creatures, your average person's gonna have about 3 or 4 hit protection. When you get into the higher ones, like 6 or so, it's a more sturdy creature. When you have a 10 hit protection creature, that is a serious threat. Your basic weapon is doing D6 damage under most circumstances, so that's going to take a few hits to go down, or at least a couple of rounds of combat. So 10 hit protection is going to be a hard thing. That's going to hit a character at least once. So it is worth mentioning, hit protection is not your meat points. That is more or less your strength. It is skill. It's your ability to dodge. It is your luck. when a character's hit protection is depleted, they have avoided serious harm. So if you're being shot with a bullet and it doesn't exceed your hit protection, you dodge out of the way a little bit. Maybe it grazed you, or you get a bruise, or it hits a bulletproof vest and leaves a nice, bruise there. Things that haven't done serious harm to you, but are wearing you down over the course of the encounter. And when it comes to damage, D6 is a baseline. That is a weapon. A standard weapon is a D6. If your character is unarmed, especially in the like of like a zombie's going to be unarmed with its little hands. Those might be a D4. That's sort of the lowest we deal for damage there. So a zombie kind of running and scratching at you without dexterous movement, use a D4 for the hands. But if they try and bite you, that is a serious threat. That might be a D6 or a D8. So again, D6 is the baseline, D4 is the unarmed, and then anything higher is sort of special. A D8 weapon is something that is particularly noteworthy. That might be like an assault rifle, like a military weapon. It's a little bit better, even if it shoots the same bullets as your hunting rifle. D10 is sort of reserved for weapons that are of particular note. That might be an artifact that you find. You pull the Excalibur out of some cave in, the Pacific Northwest for some reason. That is a legendary weapon, and it is a D10 as you wield it against the coming horde. And then D12, largely speaking, in terms of straight damage, D12 should be avoided. That is typically when you have an enhanced attack. Enhanced is when you have everything in your favor. You're using fire against an ice creature, something like that. That is your enhanced attacks. And that is a monumentous thing. That is a character's using their tools and ingenuity to attack creatures in a special manner. So D12 is sort of the reward they get for doing so. Not that your NPCs and your creatures can't have that. Just keep that in mind. That sort of mechanical callback there. You can do like D20 damage if you feel the need for it. Just know that is going to take out a character and almost guaranteed a single roll. So at least there's a 50% chance of doing so. So truly horde and eldritch creatures, keep that for the D20 if you need to use it at all. But just a couple other things here for stat blocks. Make sure you're using stress. We talked about how stress is an agent of change, and that is sort of the core tension of the characters as they face these horrors there and how they get fallout. So don't have all of your zombies do, just straight damage. Add some stress in there. Make them fearful of the change. Make them fearful that they will become like that zombie if they are not careful. A good way to start the baseline for stress is D4. These aren't really things that are happening from weapons per se. They're happening from things intrinsic to the entities that you're facing. They are the horrors, tangibly affecting the characters. So D4 usually works as a good baseline, and then kind of increase from there under the same guidance as the previous stats. Now, we've been changing this just ever so slightly in the Investigator edition of Liminal Horror, in the coming deluxe edition, where players, when they take damage, they have to make a strength save. If they fail that strength save, this is when they take strength damage, to be clear. They gain a wound, and the wound is based on the severity of the damage. When NPCs take critical damage, when they fail their strength save, they don't necessarily take wounds. You can do so if you want as a GM, but for simplicity, your NPCs, your stat blocks that you're writing, they take critical damage and something happens. Most circumstances, they fall out of combat, whatever that may mean for a creature. You shoot a leg off a zombie and it collapses to the ground and pauses for a moment. And then it wakes back up and starts crawling its way towards you. It's taking critical damage. It has fallen out of combat, but because it is a zombie, it wakes back up and continues forward. Under most circumstances, that's your basic guideline. They take critical damage, they fall out of combat. For specific creatures, you can get a little fun with that. You can increase the threat. To spoil the bloom a little bit here, the big old flesh hydra, the anthromycin that we wrote in, when it takes critical damage, Oh, let me back up and explain what that thing is. So that is nope, nope, there we go. That guy right there. I'm learning a camera. So the Andromycin is a conglomeration of multiple different people bound together by fungus. When it takes critical damage, it rips apart, splitting into its individual hosts, and then you have 5 people to deal with instead of one hulking creature that are coming at you. So be creative with your critical damage, especially for your boss creatures or anything that's meant to be super impactful. And then just real quick, we got a bunch of cheats that you can use here. If the creature can avoid being hit or avoid being harmed, bump up its HP. If it can soak up damage, give it a little bit of armor. We typically run in ranges of 0 to 3 for most creatures. But the truly, damage soaks, the true tanks might have a little bit more armor than that. But again, keep that for special circumstances. We usually want to keep in that 0 to 3 range. If a character or if an NPC is physically powerful, give them more strength. Or if they have the ability to avoid or to continue to fight after taking serious harm. Was it Jason in the horror movie? You can shoot that fucker as many times as you want, but he's going to keep going. That is a character with high strength. He is taking that harm. You can see it. You're blowing holes in him with your guns, but he's going to keep moving. That is a physically powerful character with high strength. Now, these characters might also have a higher damage die in response. Jason can cleave through people with a machete in one swing. He might be doing D10 damage with that machete. So physically powerful character, or high strength or high damage. If they're quick, again, give them either higher hit protection or just bump it up to dexterity. Dex is something that's rarely used compared to the control and strength. It's mostly for attempts to sort of bind a character down. If you have a taser that's going to target stress directly, or not stress, dexterity directly. So keep that in mind as you're building your creature. It's a little less needed than some of the other ones, but if they are quick, give them high dex. And more importantly, if the creatures are weird or have a better understanding of the weird, give them high control. If they are ones that can do things that are weird, instead of standard damage, give them a stress damage to deal out to your players. I think we got a question here. What's up?
Yeah. Good question in chat from Grass Cower. He says, I often don't see stability on stat blocks. I imagine this could be because PCs don't have many ways of dealing stress. Are there any other reasons for this, or is it just omitted or considered redundant?
Stability is an interesting thing in the system here. So for those who don't immediately know what we refer to when we're talking about stability, stability is like your mental armor. It is the thing that protects your character from stress. The reason we don't really see this primarily is because it's kind of rare. Most of the time, stability is coming either from getting fallout or finding like an artifact that gives you a little bit more stability. It helps you fight against the horrors in a more mental way. We want to consider it that rather than the physical way. So we've also got this mechanic in there that comes from Evelyn Moreu, about using cell phones to gain stability. You're viewing the horrors through a lens, and that protects you from things being as horrifying. So every character carries a cell phone, so every character has the potential to gain stability if they're using that phone to kind of view the horror rather than staring at it with their own eyes. So when we're talking about stat blocks, one, stability is rare. If you're writing NPCs, it's only really going to be like seasoned investigators that are part of your missions that have stability, or cultists that are already exposed to the horrors. But realistically, players dealing stress damage is almost non-existent. I don't think we have a single example of a time where player characters like the investigators can deal, unless I'm forgetting something.
Sometimes a fallout or a resonant artifact might cause stress, but typically that is in framing how it would cause stress to your teammates.
Yeah, fair enough. So that's pretty much it. If you can also use the your stats as a way to inform narrative, even if you don't think stability is going to be used by the player characters in any tangible way. Giving a character stability is already telling us something about them. You know, they've already seen the weird and are protected against it, or maybe they're just sort of naturally protected against it. But it might not come up at the table, but it tells you that at the very least. With that in mind, do we have anything else to add here before we move on? All right, let's keep going. We're getting close to finishing up here. Only, hour and a half. Nice. All right. Sanity. This is something that might come up in the adventures that you're trying to adapt, but it's not something we really deal with Liminal Horror. Liminal Horror as a system has taken the intentional step to diverge away from the concept of sanity in an attempt to avoid any of the problematic aspects that are sort of associated with what is inevitably the stigmatization of mental health struggles. If you are converting from an adventure or rewriting from an adventure or story that deals heavily with these concepts, you're going to have a little bit of a hard time because there isn't really a one-for-one. You know, the closest analog in Liminal Horror is going to be stress and fallout. So instead of like, you lose D10 sanity, it's like, you can take some stress. That's going to solve your problem probably 9 times out of 10, or realistically. But you have the opportunity to be a little more clever with it. So again, when you're dealing with this, you don't really want to do the descent into madness through Fallout. You know, like you could create a series of Fallout that represent, you know, various mental health disorders, and as the characters take stress, they start to be affected by this. But it's not really a good thing to do, all things considered. You're still dealing with the stigmatization of mental health. You are gamifying, you know, mental health struggles, and there's a fine line that you can kind of skate here. It's perfectly okay if you like these sanity mechanics. Now, we're not going to tell you how to play your games, but Liminal Horror as it's set up isn't really meant to support that type of play. So just keep that in mind as you're sort of writing your adventures and doing your Fallout of your own, especially if you plan on releasing this as some third-party adventure. What we recommend, though, is to consider what sanity is meant to elicit in the source material. You know, one of the common themes in the Cthulhu stories is obsession. Your character is diverging into madness through means of obsession. We can play with that. We don't necessarily need to do the madness part, but we can play with the obsession aspect of it. Maybe you gain this sort of hankering to read illicit text or find the source of this otherworldly incursion. It is something that is caught in your mind and you feel compelled to do so. That could be a Fallout. It might work well because it is sort of pulling your characters in a particular direction and putting them in danger as they sort of act upon this source of new obsession there. But it is not really the characters losing their mind in a tangible manner. It is the horror drawing them in through means of some inherent connection. Anything else to add to this one? I think I'm covered it.
No, I think it's just really important, you know, to make sure that you are really cognizant of how you're approaching this when you're adapting, especially adapting stuff with sanity mechanics, because it is really easy to fall into a way that we've been trying to intentionally avoid, and that I think I found not only avoiding it as feeling good, but it is much more rewarding. I think when we're going to talk about how Fallout comes into play, I think it is much more interesting at the table as well.
I think it's coming up. Let's see. Oh, whoops. I think Fallout's next. All right. So the Doom Clock. This is something that was in the original, what we're calling the Legacy Edition of Liminal Horror. It was sort of this sort of tangent. It was included in the back, but a couple lines of text wasn't like super detailed and explained at the time. And we're trying to make this a little bit more robust because it's a key part of 2 of the 3 modules going forward. Well, more than that actually, but you get the point. The Doom Clock is an escalating series of events that will come to pass if the investigators do not act. This is not something that we've invented. The original Doom Clock, was it from Monster of the Week that you pulled it from?
Doom Clock, I think, is if I had to trace its lineage, it's very specifically Monster of the Week, and then Faction Fronts from Dungeon World were probably the two largest inspirations in terms of what happens when you don't do anything, and giving the central tension of the story a drive that then adapts as well as players do things.
Yeah, it's clocks are a Forge era design. I think it was Ron Edwards himself that came up with the original concept, at least as far as we can kind of trace it back. For whatever folk might think of Ron Edwards, this is probably his single greatest contribution to tabletop RPGs is this concept. It was later pulled and adapted for Apocalypse World, and then they're all called different things too, but they're progress clocks. That's really all it is. And then that concept has been brought forward in a number of ways. Blades in the Dark deals with it more directly as like actual clocks. They'll call it out as such. Monster of the Week has a funny name for it that I'm forgetting, but you get the point. It's worth looking up some of those original inspirations, especially as you're trying to write your own Doom Clock. But it's very much something that comes from the story game side of things. As a specific mechanic, I think this concept is as old as the media itself, at a minimum, but regardless, the mechanical aspect of it at least has that lineage. So, like we said, it's an escalating series of events. What the Doom Clock is for is creating tension over periods of time. The period of time itself is subjective. It will depend on what you want your Doom Clock to accomplish. This could be a single session. You can use a clock for a session. Realistically, you can use a clock for like one action if you really want to, but I think getting that granular kind of loses the plot a little bit. But it's for creating that tension. These are the events that happen if you do nothing. It is the timeline that happens if the PCs don't act. That's another common way it's referred to, especially in OSR spaces. Not every scenario is really going to benefit from it either. So we recommend this, especially if you are having trouble with naturally creating tension, but you're not always going to need it. If you're dropped in a horror dungeon and your one goal is to escape, you don't really need something ticking in the background to create tension. The tension is created in the moment. You're trying to get the fuck out of the building. The things that you encounter are where that tension comes from. But this is chasing your players up trees. It's the way I've heard it referred to. It helps. It is what's pushing you deeper into the investigation. If you can't find those clues, the horror is going to act, and it will continue to act until it achieves its goals. And that is what the Doom Clock represents. It's the horror pushing forward, doing what it wishes to achieve up until certain doom happens. Now, doom is subjective, and we'll talk about that later. I know I got a slide coming up for that. But doom is the thing the horror wants. So the Doom Clock represents the horror acting in service to its goals. Now, the key part of this principle is it is designed to be interrupted. Plan for interference when writing your Doom Clocks. This is not a railroad. This is a representation of the horrors attempting to achieve their goals. So if the players do what they're supposed to do, you may never tick down the entire Doom Clock. It is just when they do not act, or they make a choice that puts them into the wrong place at the wrong time, or they're slow in their actions, Doom Clock ticks forward and bad things come to pass. So with that in mind, it is worth keeping track of when your clock ticks forward. In the most basic sense, the best time to tick a Doom Clock forward is when it's most narratively interesting. What that means will change depending on your adventure. In the Bloom, the Doom clock ticks forward once a day. The idea for the Bloom was that the adventure takes place over the course of about a week, with the Doom clock ticking forward every night to represent the days passing. So we found that to be narratively interesting because you have this very clear day and night cycle here linked to the horror itself as it progresses over the course of the investigation. But your Doom clock might have other triggers. It might be when the players do something directly, like when they find the mayor's letter, they're secretly seen by one of the cultists hiding behind a painting, staring out at them. They will begin to push their plans forward quicker, so it ticks the clock. Those are a little bit more complex to kind of set up there, but it is worth exploring if you think you've got a good idea to do it. But the easiest way to do it is set intervals, phases, days, real world time. There is a really good mothership one shot, The Haunting of Ypsilon 14. This doesn't have a doom clock per se, but it does have a escalating sequence of events linked to a time structure. It's every 10 minutes of real time. If you run it as it's written, the monster at the center of the adventure kills someone. So you have this thing moving in the background, and it is not linked to the adventure itself. This is session pacing with Epsilon 14. It's dealing with real time. It keeps the pace moving. It keeps things moving forward. The players are never settled. They're always on their back feet because they have to keep reacting to this thing going around and killing people. And so that's also worth keeping in mind that it is inherently attempting to create escalating tension. So you can take the clock forward when things start to drag. If you are stuck on those clues, you tick the clock forward. That gives your player something to react to move forward, to continue to push the adventure forward, in at least a tangible manner. Now, we have sort of formalized this setup as part of the writing that we're doing for the deluxe edition. This is all draft, so some of it may change, but we figured it'd be a pretty good idea to start talking about this in some more of a formal manner here. We've written a basic setup for a Doom clock. This is a 6-step clock, and it represents a rough story arc. If you follow this Doom clock, you got the seeds to a pretty good horror adventure. It is inherently set up for a specific type of horror adventure, a slow burn. So this might not be useful for you specifically, but keep these in mind as you're running through, as you're writing your Doom clock. This is how we're going to be telling people how to do it. Like I said, there are 6 steps. It's Doom 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and Doom itself. The first of these steps is the calm before the storm. This is really just a representation of where your investigators enter the narrative. Things have already started to be a little weird. That is what is drawing your investigators in to begin with. But we don't really know what's going on yet. Nothing has been revealed in any substantial manner. When we move into Doom 2, this is when the omens start to manifest. Things appear that hint at the grander horror. This might just be, people dying or disappearing, something subtle that's still in the background, but enough to draw attention for those that are looking. When you finally get to Doom 3, that's when things start to get a little worse. The plot thickens. You have tangible encounters with the weird, or at least they begin to happen in more frequency. The NPCs that you interact with may disappear. Or, as we talked about earlier, the environment starts to noticeably change as long as you're going to the locations to see the change. By the time you've reached Doom 4, you're more than halfway through this arc here. This is when the threat is made apparent. The horror is exposed. Maybe the creature is seen in broad daylight, or maybe more people are taken away. Either way, it's harder at this stage in your horror adventure to ignore that something bad is happening. That is sort of the key part here. By the time you get to Doom 5, this is when the horror comes knocking directly. It's either going to be through direct action against you and your investigators, or it's going to be indirectly through environmental change. Once you've reached this point, it is effectively the point of no return. The horror has done something tangible, whether it's, kidnapped people, it's killed NPCs, it has taken over the environment, it's doing something to make it very apparent that you as investigators have to act if you're going to prevent certain doom. And then certain doom is the final step. This is truly the point of no return. There is no turning back after this point has happened. If you have reached Doom 6, Doom itself, the investigators have failed to prevent the horrors from enacting their plans. The goals that we talked about earlier, the horror has achieved them in some tangible manner. The key here, when you're writing your Doom clock, is what this means is subjective. This could be the world ends. That's sort of the extreme end of it. The otherworldly creature has found its way into our prime material plane and is bringing with it the apocalypse. Doom has happened. But this might be smaller, might be more personal. In the Bloom, doom simply means that cold water has been consumed entirely. The town is gone as you knew it. The creatures and the fungus have spread and manifested. This also could be something smaller and more personal. If your investigation is about discovering the location of a kidnapped NPC that you're hired to find, certain doom might be the NPC being killed by whoever has her hostage, or maybe injected with whatever serum is being tested out that's causing these horrid monstrosities. You could no longer save this person. They are lost. But above all, the adventure is not over. Not always when doom happens. You can still do something. It's just, who knows what that something is. If you're chasing after that NPC that has been transformed, it might be as simple as putting them down so they no longer suffer as a horror, or even going and destroying the lab that has created these monstrosities to prevent future monstrosities. Even though doom has occurred, there is still a course of action that can go forth. Even when cold water had been completely consumed by the fungal horde, you're still up and you're still moving around as characters. Maybe you burn the whole town to the ground. That seems to be a pretty common ending, is to burn it all down. So keep that in mind. Doom represents serious, tangible change that has happened. The steps of the Doom clock are escalating up until that point, and the horror has achieved their goals, but it does not mean that the end has happened necessarily. We have anything else to add to this before we push forward? Sick. Any questions or anything that would be pertinent? All right. Let's keep moving. We only got I got 4 more. Well, 3 more, technically. The 4th is a question slide. So we're just about coming up towards the end here. If you do have questions, pop those into chat. We're going to start covering them in just a few minutes. Oops. Okay, so the Voidcrawl. This is something that we've been toying with. It exists in multiple forms, and we're sort of coalescing those into what will come to be in the deluxe edition. So this has been fluid since it's been introduced. There is a form in the Liminal Horror Investigators edition. It is useful, but we are making some changes to it. Just keep that in mind. But it first appeared in the Bloom. And it will be in Hungry Hollow as well, just for reference. So the Voidcrawl is a procedure. We call it, procedure for exploring dark places, but it could be a little more useful beyond that. What it is it's using an overloaded encounter die to create narrative events effectively. An overloaded encounter die is something that's been floating around for, I think the original blog post was like 10 years ago, but it's not necessarily a term that everybody knows. So just real quick, your standard encounter die is a D6. You roll, we're talking OSR play that we take, kind of pay homage to with this system here. So you roll your D6. If it lands on a 1, the encounter occurs. If it lands on a 2 or 3, some sign of the encounter occurs. And if it lands on a 4 to 6, nothing happens. You roll your encounter die every, 15 minutes, every dungeon turn, so on and so forth. That's usually the pretty standard procedure there. What an overload and encounter die does is add other things to the die roll. In its original form, this was a lot about resource tracking. Like if you roll a 3, the torch that you've been carrying this dungeon so far goes out. It's offloading a lot of tracking onto a sort of random encounter mechanic there that you're already rolling to begin with. So the original post, I think it's by Necropraxis is the original blog post or something like that. It's worth reading that, especially if you want to learn more about this as we are sort of developing it over time. But with that in mind, the Voidcrawl is an overloaded encounter die. It is your standard encounter die. You're rolling it when something significant happens in terms of time investment. You're exploring a new location. You are resting for an extended period of time. There's a lull, so you want something to occur. You roll it, and some random event happens. This, again, just like the Doom Clock, you're not going to need a Voidcrawl for every scenario. Sometimes you can just get away with that standard encounter roll. You roll a d6 and on a 1 an encounter happens. That might be perfect for your system or for your adventure. Voidcrawls become specifically useful when you need conflict to drive play forward, or you could use some narrative engine to help generate events for your players to react to. This is especially helpful in sandbox locations. The Bloom is a big open, like a town and its surrounding areas. Hungry Hollow is a similar event. You're dealing with one specific town there. Things are going to be happening as the horror story sort of ramps up. And the Voidcrawl is a representation of that. It is giving you information in one sense, but it's also giving you something to react to as you continue to push forward. So the way we have it set up, it's D6. When you rolling this die is really up to you as the adventure writer. We say every 20 minutes or every time something, you're exploring a new location or something interesting is happening. Whenever you want a complication, that's sort of like the long and short of it. You roll it, you consult the results, and you look at the table, and you can kind of break it down further from there. What we've done is we split the Voidcrawl into phases. It's typically 2 phases, day and night is what we've been working with. But you can break it down in any sort of granular manner you think is useful. The day-night cycle, splitting it into 2 phases with the Voidcrawl, helps establish an escalating sequence of tension where in the day things are a little less scary, but as night happens or night falls, everything gets inherently more dangerous because you're using more options on the Voidcrawl. So in the Bloom, which the one we have up on the screen here is based off of, during the day, when you roll a Voidcrawl, if it is a 4 to 6, you just ignore it. Your only concern during the day is if you land on a 1 to 3 and you use the results that are present there. When you are exploring during the night, like literal night, that is when you roll, or when you're in a location that is inherently dangerous in and of itself. Say the investigators have broken into a factory owned by some, executive that the GM knows is doing something shady, but the players might not. You can use that Voidcrawl, consider it night in terms of the phases and how dangerous it might be, even if it's broad daylight outside. So day and night, and the phases being more like narrative constraints rather than literal in some spots here. But talk about the Voidcrawl itself. If you roll a 1, that's an encounter. We're calling these the day encounters, typically because you're only rolling or only concerned with the 1 to 3 during the day. But a day encounter is something strange or uncanny. It's not inherently dangerous. You're not being attacked by a creature when you're rolling a day encounter, but based on what the characters and the players choose to do next, that situation might turn deadly. When you roll a 2, it's a clue. There's a hint of the greater mystery at play and a warning of danger. The key difference here You will have clues written into your environment that the players can explore. When a clue is rolled on the Voidcrawl and you're exploring a location, that clue becomes something immediately obvious to the characters. This could be, in the bloom. It could just be glowing fungus. That might be a clue. And you're seeing this in some building in the middle of nowhere as you're kind of pulling it out and you look at it and it is just a small little hint. Something weird is happening. This fungus usually doesn't grow here. It's telling you that there is a danger happening in the background. Maybe you find someone's ID dropped upon the ground or, hammered to the wall, tacked into place. Something small, something obvious. You would see it as you entered the room, but it's not so large that it solves the mystery for you. What we do for the modules is write a list of clues out. We get I think we do D10 lists, if I remember correctly. And this is what I was talking about earlier about having variable clues. If you're using a void crawl, having that list of things that aren't specific to locations is real good. And it lets that random chance happen during play, and it affects how players are going to approach their next situation. If they find that ID somewhere random in the woods, and they know that that character it belongs to is safe in town waiting, that gives them a step. You can take this and go question the person. Why were you here during this day? Maybe they dropped the ID by accident when they were searching for clues themselves, something of the sort. It's just you're giving the players tangible information that they can then choose to act on if they so desire. Now, if you roll a 3, that is an omen, portent of things to come. The way that we have kind of broken this down is to kind of tie it a little bit more directly to the mechanics there. You don't have to use this for your own void crawls. We just find this sort of the most interesting way to go about this. Take one of your investigators, one of your players, take a look at the Fallout table or roll on it directly, and use that Fallout result to foreshadow the Fallout they will receive next when that comes up. So the character might not get into danger anytime soon, but note what that Fallout is. And you're relying on those themes of the adventure, and you're tying it directly to the Fallout, and you're warning the player character that if they're not careful, this thing is going to happen to them. What that means in the moment is subjective, it's random, so we won't always know. But one of the good examples was there's a Fallout in the Bloom that's about how fungal cords start growing beneath your skin. I think they make your character a little bit stronger, something of the sort. You can telegraph that by having thick fungal cords growing on a tree outside of this house. So you've seeded that imagery, and when it starts happening to them, you're giving the players a clue at something else is going on. This horrid fungus thing is transforming the environment, but it's also transforming me. So you draw parallels to the things that you see in the world. And because it's fun to make these things random, that's what the Omen does in the Void Crawl. Now, for the rest, 4, 5, and 6 are sort of things that are more overtly dangerous and happening tangibly to the characters, as opposed to being more like narrative events. 4 is a setback, so something that impedes progress. A door locks behind the characters, swung shut by some unseen character. A tree falls in the forest, blocking the path ahead. The road is eroded away in your path as you're trying to drive your car away from a horror chasing behind you. Something like that. It stops them in their tracks and forces them to reconsider and plan alternate routes. It is a setback. But it doesn't have to be physical or environmental. It could be that a piece of equipment in their inventory is suddenly missing. Was it stolen? Did it just drop out? How necessary was it? I think I need to play around with this a little bit. It just impedes progress or potential progress. 5 is a horror. Something overtly terrifying or uncanny occurs. This isn't an encounter per se. This is maybe you find a dead body. That's sort of like the most simplest one there. Maybe it's somebody you know. Maybe the horror at play in the adventure has infected somebody you know, and they're slowly turning into a monster before your eyes. Something of the sort. Again, it's another one of those situations that could turn into an encounter if things progress, but it is meant to sort of terrify and elicit the sense of horror there. This is again where your themes are going to be essential as you're building your lists for this void crawl. And then finally is the night encounter. This is probably the most straightforward. One of your creatures appears and it is inherently threatening or dangerous. This is under most cases is going to be a surprise encounter. A zombie runs out of the woods. Jason appears with his knife, so on and so forth. Deal with that as you see fit. All right, that's all I got on that. Do we have anything to add? All right, we are gonna keep on trucking here. We're getting close to the end. All right, Fallout. This is one of the parts you get to have a lot of fun, but it's also one of the trickiest parts of the system. You are going to want to have Fallout for your adventure. We have a bunch of ones in the Investigators Edition. We're going to have a ton of them in the Deluxe Edition. Those aren't always going to be appropriate for your adventure or mystery or scenario, whatever you want to call it. So Fallout are representations of the horrors having tangible effects on your character. This is your character being changed by the horrors that they face. Fallout is both body horror. It's something happening against your character's will. It's happening to them directly, but it's also a path to power. Fallout is the only source of tangible mechanical character progression in Liminal Horror. If you want your stats to increase, you have to interface with the horrors directly and gain Fallout. But you risk death by doing so, by interacting with these horrors. So it's not really something that you're seeking unless you are particularly driven by certain motivations. But it is a way for your characters to get a little stronger. The key is, with that strength, they also get a little weirder. The one I talked about earlier, the Fallout where fungal cords start racing through your skin. If your shirt is rolled down, somebody's going to notice that. It's like big, thick, veiny lines beneath your skin that might pulse and convulse and whatnot. That is going to have a narrative implication. But it did make your character a little stronger, a little more able to take on the horrors that they face. Not every Fallout is going to be like this, but keep that in mind that this is where any of the mechanical character progression happens. It is taken from the scars from Electric Bastion Land and Cairn, and sort of blown outwards to be horror. Now, like I talked about earlier, the best practice is just to directly connect Fallout to the scenario. Sometimes the ones we've written going to be perfect for you. Just use those if you're running them for your home group. But if you are doing something a little more out there in terms of adapting the mystery or writing it for third-party publication, you're going to want to create your own custom Fallout. You want to use them to reinforce the underlying themes and central tension of your scenario. And the key here, it's the sign that you tell your players and their characters that they're not just fighting the monsters. It's that those monsters could be them under different circumstances. Your characters through Fallout are slowly turning into the creatures that they face. Even if it does make them a little stronger, they're looking at dark reflections of themselves for every creature that they take down that has the potential to cause fallout. So use that to reinforce your central themes and the central horror at the core of your adventure. Beyond that, Fallout is subjective. We tend to use +1 armor, D4, and add it to a stat, +1 stability, or giving people some strange ability. I believe it's in the Bureau where, let me read it specifically because I like this one. One of the Fallout in the Bureau is Halo of Black Flame. It forms over your head, faint at first, but the longer you spend in this place, the more pronounced it becomes. Roll D4 and add it to your control. So your characters are getting a little better at handling the horrors, but they have this slow spreading, flaming halo forming above their head that is clear representation of the corruption that has started to infect their system. Again, hard not to notice that fallout. It's going to affect how they interact with players and the player characters and the NPCs as they go forward. So it has narrative implication and mechanical implication. It gives you a little bit of strength, but also fucks you up. But keep that in mind. There's no real hard and fast rule for writing Fallout because it is so specific to your chosen scenario. If you're doing stat boosts, keep it at D4. You don't really want to go crazy. But keep in mind that a character can only get to 18, and you can even naturally roll that during character creation if you're exceptionally lucky. Giving them armor is a good one too. Stability is a nice one because it protects them. But it's the weird abilities that I think are sort of the more fun. Let me go back to the Bureau again because I know we did a couple of ones that are weird abilities here. That's an artifact. Okay, so this one is entropic forces. Chaos flows through you like a conduit. Once per session, you can re-roll any save or damage die. This is playing with a little bit of metatextual aspects of it, acknowledging that we are playing a game here, but that is a little bit of fun where your character, through this corruption, has a little bit of control over fate. And then there's Arm of the Night. The flesh from your right arm sloughs off and is replaced by sharp angles made of shadows. That sharp bit of your arm is now acting as a D8 weapon. So horrifying. You've now lost your arm and you've got this construct of shadow that replaces it. Well, it's pretty cool that it deals D8 damage as you stab the rest of the shadow creatures going forward. So stuff like that. You don't always have to keep it to stat boosts. It is fun if it is also terrifying, if it is changing your characters in interesting ways, in ways that push them into more dangerous situations. If a character is missing an arm, is now a shaft of shadow that ends at a point. They don't really have a hand anymore. They can fire their gun with their left hand. Not going to be super accurate if they were a righty. So that's going to push them directly into conflict with the creatures that they face now. If you want to go hit that shade, you got to take your thing and go stab them. You got to get close. You can't rely on that gun like you did before. I think we got a question. What's up?
I lost the presentation. It's all gray.
Oh no. Is that me?
Because I still see me and I still see the stuff at the bottom.
We're stopping. We're going to bring you to me. You should be following me. I'm going to hit percent again. How does that look?
Boom.
Boom. Perfect.
All fixed.
May have just timed out.
Can you go to another page and come back? Part of it's black. Yeah, one more time, I go 2 pages. There we go. Now you can go back.
We're back. Okay.
All right, we're good.
Sick. All right. I was just about done with Fallout. Do we have anything to add to this one?
No, and when it says create custom Fallout for your adventure, sometimes it's just as many as like 4 to 6. It communicates to the facilitators who, if you're writing as a third party publishing, sort of like it helps reinforce the tone. And like I said, like Josh said, you can pull from the ones that we've used. You can adapt the ones we've used too and change them to be a little bit more specific to the monster. This is where that theming for the horror comes really into play, because it will really, if I have, if of teleporting through shadows, right? If it's very shadow based, we did that for the Bureau. There might be a different aesthetic theme to the horror, and that might just reskin it a little bit. But yeah, it's one of the harder things to do. It's one of the more fun things to do too, and it is one of the more memorable things for your players when they get the Fallout, and it feels really good when you write a cool one and then they love that ability that you gave them.
Now, I think we're coming up to our last main slide here. If I can get the thing to work. There we go. All right. So we've been talking a lot about adapting some mysteries, scenarios. So we thought it'd be kind of cool to give you guys some practical examples of what that would look like. This is just going to be, sorry, I froze for a second. This is going to be high level stuff for now. We'll just shout out some ideas. I've got 3 up here. I think Goblin Archive had a few more worth shouting out to. But the idea is that we're taking these original story ideas and then finding a little twist in how to adapt them. And so we wanted to kind of highlight here that adaptations can come from any source of inspiration that has merit, if you think it would work in modern horror. And what we wanted to reiterate here, it's not just old adventures. That could be anything. So I got 3. Like I said, I think we got a few more that we can kind of screw around with. But the first, The Picture of Dorian Gray. It's this Oscar Wilde book from, I think, the late 1800s, if I had to remember the date. For those who don't know, Dorian Gray is about an artist who has very homoerotic tension with the title character Dorian Gray, and puts their like heart and soul into painting this portrait of the young man. And Dorian Gray himself has this sort of existential crisis upon looking at this picture and realizing that this has captured a moment in time, and he will never be as youthful looking as this one picture. So it's only going to be a source of sadness. And it's through that sort of act that he creates this bind to the painting where as Dorian ages, his physical body remains as pristine as it was within that painting when it was painted, but the painting itself changes to reflect the changes to Dorian. It is Dorian avoids harm, but his painting takes fallout. Now, this is a story that was at its heart sort of kind of playing with criticisms of class and wealth, and just kind of like how evil people can be at heart, because Dorian Gray is not a good man. And the story is kind of how that sort of unfurls to the point that leads up to Dorian's death. But we can take some of those core concepts and make them horror. This is a little less specific, but the one example that we have here is that the artist himself has gazed upon another world, a shifting world, and they've decided to paint it in canvas and oil. But gazing upon that world and depicting it in art has created a gateway of sorts from this painting. And the other world, the shifting world, is bleeding outwards into ours from the painting itself. So in your adventure, weird shit can happen. It surrounds this artist's home, and eventually you have to go down and track down and destroy the painting. There you go. You got a pretty solid adventure right there. Your doom clock could be, things leaking out of the painting into our world, and so on and so forth, eventually leading up to the climax. Now, the next one we have here is the original Max Payne by Remedy Entertainment. It's a video game from, I think it's 2001, PlayStation 2, either way. Max Payne deals with the titular character waging a one-man war against the entire mafia of New York after his wife and child were killed based on this new street drug that was introduced. Somebody let junkies into his house and they killed his family. So he's on a path of revenge. Max Payne takes place in New York City primarily, but it's not really New York City. It's sort of like this nightmare version of it, even within the world of the fiction. It is a noir. It's pulling on noir themes where New York is mostly a nightmare as Max runs through it and murders hundreds of people. But we can take inspiration from that. Your investigators, they might find themselves trapped in literal nightmare New York, drawn into the city through their own personal traumas. To escape this nightmare, the twisting skyscrapers and winding streets, they need to battle against the city's shadowy denizens and dive deeper into its heart to find the source of the thing that keeps them locked in this nightmare. There you go. You got a whole city. You can set your players loose on it and let them battle against mobsters as shadow entities. It's a little workshopping, but I mean, the core idea is there. And then the last one we have listed here at the very least is taking Ravenloft and using it up a little bit. Now, we've stated that modern horror doesn't necessarily mean now. Modern horror, in terms of liminal horror, is roughly the 1970s until now. So you can play with the time frame a little bit. So Ravenloft, it's the 1980s, and you're trapped in the neon high-rise of the eccentric billionaire tech giant Steve Zarovich. While you entered into the building on your own free will, no door or window has proven to lead back out. And you know that finding Zarovich is going to be the key to your escape. So Ravenloft as a module, at least the original was set in, I think it's Barovia, if I remember the place right. But it's sort of this place that Strahd von Zarovich, that's his name, has pulled out of like the normal dimensional space and has kind of created a demi plane out of it that he controls. And the whole course of the adventure is kind of screwing with the player character, but they need to go and find several artifacts and take out Strahd himself, so that they can leave, this realm. So you can take that and instead of a town in the middle of a demi plane, trap them in an 80s neon high rise where they need to travel through the floors. Each floor is a part of the town that you can kind of steal and build up your skyscraper with, finally leading up to the executive suite where you find Zarovich himself and you have a big old battle. Something of the sort. Again, these ideas need a lot of work, but they are examples of things you can do. Take the core of these original adventures, rip them apart, and then just add a bunch of fun stuff in there to make them modern horror. Oh, we got a question.
Yeah. To Grascour once again. They asked in chat, what would you identify as the horrors, as the horror's motivation in the case of Dorian Gray?
So the one that I was talking about for Dorian Gray, this is a little bit of a spin on the adventure. The example I gave doesn't have a Dorian Gray. It is using the fact that the painting itself is sort of inherently magical for all intents and purposes. When we're talking about, in this case, the horror's motivation, it is to spread. It is leaking out of the painting. The horror wants to continue to do so. That demiplane, the shifting world, as I've called it, is now having an incursion onto ours. It is consuming the prime material plane in a sense. It's leaving the frame of the painting, it's spreading outward to consume everything. So the idea would be to find the painting itself and destroy it before it can consume. And again, this is a very, very simplistic idea. Maybe there is a creature that lives beyond the plane, but can't quite cross over until a certain circumstance has been met. The artist depicts this creature that's out there, but it is bound by the shifting world in the painting until our world is like the shifting world. So the more our world becomes that world, the more it has the ability to leave the frame and enter our existence. So you got some options to play with. It can either be environmental or a literal bad guy that can kind of like enact these changes. But again, that example doesn't really deal with Dorian Gray himself. It's just taking the basic pieces of inspiration and then running with them. Do we have any more examples we want to discuss?
Muted. Okay, I had two that just popped in my head when we were trying to think about this. I tend to really like pulling from, like, the Ravenloft one was pulling from a module, but sometimes pulling from film, right? One being, I love time loops, and I think Groundhog Day is a great time loop that would be a great adventure and not that hard to make into a horror adventure pulling through. And so sort of like a time loop slasher. And how do you break that time loop? How many ways can one person be killed or a party be killed as you loop through trying to figure out how to get out? Another one, I think another, and this is more a genre that would be ripe for doing it for modern horror, is Heist Gone Wrong. I think that Heist Gone Wrong in and of themselves often have their own horror aspects to them, and you could play that up pretty highly in a way that is very interesting. Pulling from Reservoir Dogs. Thematically too, it aligns a little bit with like It Follows or Miracle Mile, that sort of like being chased by and escaping, as a means of um, tension. And so there's a lot there. There's a lot everywhere to pull from. I'm really excited to see what people do in terms of Twisted Classics. We tried to keep it open enough that it didn't have to just be classic modules. It's really like, how can you take a concept that you find very passionate about and then apply it to the sort of modern horror tabletop context.
Yeah, make some weird stuff, please.
Please do a time loop. Someone,
Oh,
please. I
please
just want a
figure it
time
out.
loop so bad. Do 10 of them. Just only time loop adventures, please. I think when done right, they're so exciting. And I think that they're just so ripe for it. The concept of repeating over and over is in and of itself horrifying. And so I think you have such ripe, already built in things there that I want to play it. I want to run it.
Yeah, the time loop is I think I've tried 3 separate times to find a compelling way to do it, and I have proven incapable of making a time loop. So somebody please do it. Unlock the secret. All right, so that is it for what we've got prepared on the slides here. We would do want to open the floor to questions. We have a bunch that were gathered ahead of time. I think there have been a few that have been popping up in chat. We'll start there. If you guys have any more questions you want to ask, please dump them into chat. As we're kind of discussing that, and we'll round out at the end to grab those. We're not going to do this forever, so we may have to cut it off at some point. But either way, the floor is open. In theory, let's keep the questions kind of specific to what we've been talking about here, but anything greater for the clarity of liminal horror itself, you can either stick to the Discord, but if we got a little time, maybe we'll cover it. So whenever, just toss the question and then we'll figure it out.
All right, we'll just stay on this one though because I like this fun transparency. So I will keep that in mind and go through some questions that were asked on the Discord prior, and then some ones that were also asked during chat. So some specifics. Chris, you asked, from my experience, lots of horror trend towards slow burn, a mystery, investigating clues, getting mixed up into trouble, then a climactic scene. What tips can you give designers on providing pacing tools or mechanics for adventures that take place over the course of a few days?
Yeah, so this one, I'm not going to say we answered it already, but I think in terms of how liminal horror handles it, that's going to be your doom clock. Let me go back. That slide. Can we still see the slides, or are you covering that?
Yeah, no, I'd love to see. You could go back if you want.
All right. Yeah, so the doom clock is how we do this. It's not the only way to do that. That's sort of the key distinction here. Is it's sort of naturally building your sense of pace and tension over time just by its very nature of being set up. So you want the slow burn. The players can do that by their own tension. Maybe you lead the trail of breadcrumbs to create the sense of pacing and tension. That's a little harder to do. That's being a very skilled writer, is to sort of like create that tension without the external mechanical aspect of it. And that might be through, like I said, very clever writing and design. This is going to be a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's kind of pertinent here.
Dungeon Crawl on the Weekly Scroll podcast. It's not allowed.
Never once.
Yeah. So this is about the intentionality of design and how that can affect play and direct play, and especially the building of tension. Now, Dungeon Crawl Classics, we've already talked about it here. One of the things popularized is a concept called the character funnel. DCC isn't the only one to have done this. I think it came technically from forums that they adapted, but they sort of formalized the process and have popularized it. So what the funnel does is it gives each player a group of characters. They're level 0 characters. They're nobodies. You put them through effectively a meat grinder, and at the end of the funnel, you have the character that you're taking on to level 1 will be your adventurer. So you play the backstory the moment that your character has sort of given away their prior life and turns to adventure. And how they gain their class and whatnot is sort of linked to this character funnel here. That's all pretty well understood by most people here, but the fun part of the aspect of the funnel design, funnels literally funnel characters. You start with sort of a broad arrangement, usually dropped off at the face of some dungeon. By the end of it, you're hitting the same point. You're being literally pushed towards the end over the course of the adventure. That is intentionality in design. That is naturally building pacing and tension, where you've got your mundane start. Your first room is the calm before the storm, and your final room is the doom, the thing you're trying to escape from. That might be an eldritch creature that lies at the end of this dungeon, or something of the sort. Maybe rocks fall and you're trying to escape, and that's the final sequence as you're kind of leaving there. So even if you're only using the doom clock as a way to set up there, you can use that to create your narrative beats and to help funnel play naturally, by literally pushing characters towards a direction. That's a little crude in terms of like mysteries, but that's sort of another way to do it. Like I said, intentionality in design and how you are setting up your locations, setting up your central tensions in order to push players towards a certain point. One of the other ways to do it is, Trophy Dark, something we've played on the Weekly Scroll here fairly recently, where Trophy Dark constrains play in such a way that you're always moving forward on a path. Trophy Dark is effectively a point crawl. You have 5 rings. Each of these represents a certain aspect that the ring is meant to highlight, and each presents a challenge. Your players will start and they go through the sequence of challenges before certain doom comes at the end. The Trophy Dark incursions are written in such a way to represent the 5 acts of a story. That whole concept is partially what has inspired this Doom Clock setup that we have here. So keep that in mind. If you need an additional resource, go look up how Trophy Gold sets up their incursions. But that's another way to do it. Again, it's not necessarily the best way or anything better than what we have here, but that is, you've got your funnel, literally pushing characters. You have the horror adventure that keeps you on a track. It's not necessarily like a railroad like we would traditionally think about it, but it does push you in a certain direction. And then you get the Doom Clock, which is just the Doom Clock is chasing your characters up a tree. You're forcing them to make an action, but you can use it to set your pace over the course of that extended adventure. Again, those are 3 ways to do it. There are countless ways to do it. It's really just trying to be clever with the writing, but setting up ways for your players to move forward, ways for tension to naturally rise over time, and trying to enact it within your module. It's not easy. This is why we provide this tool set here. If you use the Doom Clock, try it out, see if you can get your own sense of pacing and play here, and then branch out and come up with something better. Maybe there is some better way to do these that we don't know yet, but that's how we do it.
Going through trying to find some more specific questions, what we talked about today. Liminal Arc 485 here in the chat asked, when adapting a scenario, how do you decide between what is fallout, an injury, or simply a condition when that line feels muddy?
You can take this one.
Yeah, okay. So I think fallout, condition, or an injury. I think injuries, it's about a lot of times where is the generating source of damage, right? If it is like a physical damage that would leave a lasting wound, that would then be an injury. Fallout is how something would become more and more strange. Sometimes you have abilities of a horror that do damage and fallout. And so that I get where is that's where it starts to be like a little bit more murky. I don't think there's a wrong way to lean in terms of that. Sometimes I like to think about it when I'm writing, like when we're writing for the deluxe edition, when I'm writing a bestiary, we're called Catalog of Strange. Some horrors tend to lean a little bit more physical, whereas others do that in sort of that metaphysical style change agents in terms of like creating fallout. Therefore, they lean a little bit heavier into stress. But there's really not a wrong way to go with it if you're running an adventure in terms of like, should this be an injury, should this be fallout, should it be damage, should it be stress? Like both things are going to tangibly change the characters, and they're going to have to deal with it. And so I don't think there is a wrong answer in terms of how your players will interact and react to it. A player losing a hand versus a player like becoming changed through some grisly fallout, like both are gonna have this end result of like this oh shit moment as the characters are trying to like get out of there and get to safety, and then like trying to move forward from what happened. So just leaning into, I think just for myself, it typically is around, is this more physical or is this more like metaphysical almost?
And just to touch real quick on conditions specifically. Conditions arise when your characters have a lack of critical need. We tend to keep conditions to deprived and fatigue, with fatigue consuming inventory and deprived being like the condition. This doesn't mean that that's the only thing that happens in Liminal Horror, but it's worth keeping in mind that this is more of conditions that represent the characters not taking care of themselves or not having the ability to take care of themselves. So a little more rare than fallout and wounds, at least in terms of like mechanical interaction.
Okay, so the next one, I'm going to summarize this question a little bit. Basically, they said, this is from Jack Edward in the Discord. They said, a lot of classic horror scenarios don't really have a strong gear component. So do you think that looking at gear, equipment, and the role of items in Liminal Horror is important to redoing these adapted scenarios into Liminal Horror? And they said, basically, to sum it up, how should someone designing Liminal Horror think about items and inventory in general?
I've been thinking a lot about this one, so I'll start. Liminal Horror has a different culture of play than even some other OSR adventures, especially like Neotrad adventures. The key difference here, you as a player are only making rolls when the chance of failure is sort of high. What I mean by that, if you have the right tool to address the situation, you don't need to roll at all. You have come prepared. If you need to get through a lock to go through the door, you have to cut through the lock or what have you, I don't need a skill roll to do that. You have your bolt cutters, just snap the lock and go in. That's the key your equipment plays. That's the reason we track it. That is why you have 10 slots and why equipment matters, is because you can use your equipment to circumvent having to roll at all. This is largely dependent on the narrative of the situation. You can't use your bolt cutters to, well, maybe you can use it to kill a creature, but bolt cutters aren't going to help you with a flat tire. There we go. So your equipment and your tools, the things you have at your disposal, are going to be how your characters and how your players use their skill and their knowledge to avoid having to roll at all. You have what you need. You can do what you need. There is no chance of failure. You can simply do it. So when you're writing, that equipment's going to be kind of key. What we've done in some of our modules here is sort of seed the ways in which you can fight the horrors through the equipment. I'm going to spoil the bloom a little bit here. There is, at the gas station, there is a barrel of fertilizer, I think it is, or something that can be used as fertilizer that's meant for one of the farmers. And you can find out this fertilizer exists. It's not hidden or anything like that. That stuff is very flammable. If you want to burn the town down, you got a source of it right there. You can use that fertilizer and keep going. I think we also hid fungicide in a couple of locations. Then there are the resonant artifacts themselves, which help you in your fight to do it. But we're giving the players options to fight the horrors, ways that we think that make sense. We're not going to put that fertilizer in the middle of a high-rise building. That doesn't make any sense there. But for a farming community, that is one of the ways to address the horror, is to try and burn the shit down. So you've got this outlook, you've got this source. So that equipment is important. You're not holding anybody's hands. You're just giving them tools in which they can use to interact with the environment in the future. So it's not something that you need to explicitly put forward at the forefront of your design, but it's not something you should forget about either. Put tools in place for players to grab, rakes and axes and shovels and places that would logically make sense. And again, we want to keep this fairly mundane and fairly grounded in reality. Maybe some doomsday prepper has got like a bunker full of guns, but that's only going to get you so far anyway, is trying to get those guns. But either way, Try and keep it grounded in the logic. Players are going to be creative. They're going to take these tools and do fun things with them, but we do want to have them there for them to do that.
Cool. I'm going to ask.
Add to that?
No, I think that pretty much hits it in terms of like the interesting part about setting something in the modern day is that we do have access to most things, but we have to have the means to go get them, right? And so sometimes that creates its own tension within. But like Josh said, seeding some things throughout, thinking of some cool things. People do love to blow stuff up, and so like whenever you can provide a logical way that that could happen, your players will find it. And they'll use it. And sometimes we make that intentional and we seed it in, or in Hungry Hollow, we have these investigator kits because you're not new investigators necessarily. Sometimes this is like your second, third, or fourth thing. And so you do sometimes have access to some more interesting things in a prep sense. And so just giving your characters opportunities to find things that they could then use, or if you're running it and they say, hey, I want to go find this tool, if it's a tool that we can logically get, like with time, yes, like if it's within the vicinity, and people will be very creative in how they utilize that.
Yeah, don't, like we talked about clues. If it's logical that something would exist, your players and investigators can typically find it. There is going to be some other resource that they pay to do so. They have a limited amount of money, so maybe they have to buy it at the store. There you go. Resource. That leaves them less money to do stuff later. The most important of them is time. If you are going to the store on a trip to pick up tools, you are committing yourself to that action for a couple hours, a phase, an hour, what have you. Some time passes that lets the doom clock tick forward. It's not gating the tools. Players can get it, but they are paying the price by doing so in some little manner that eventually becomes important later.
All right, I'm going to ask one of my questions because you kind of touched on it a little bit. We talked about Liminal Horror is a modern horror setting, but have there been any thoughts about adapting an adventure into a non-modern setting, something like Vampire: The Dark Ages?
Do you want to take this one or should I?
You can't. I have thought once about doing a master order hack for Liminal Horror, and that still's in the brain. But personally, I haven't quite been like, oh, I want to utilize Liminal Horror for this other type setting personally. But Josh has 1,000 ideas in the brain, so Josh probably has something.
I'm cursed to never have a moment to spare of thought. Something is always happening in my brain. So I think the key is that no, you know, Liminal Horror as a base is very highly adaptable. You can, it's built off of Cairn, which Cairn is built off of Into the Odd and Knave and Mouse Rider. Realistically, like if you want to go run a Dark Ages adventure, I'm probably going to point you to Cairn. Like you can add Fallout into that. It changes, Fallout augments what was already present in Cairn to make it more adapted to horror. So it's very easy to just take that system and put it right back in. So I don't think we as a entity making adventures need to necessarily diverge at this point. We're just kind of getting into the swing of making modern horror adventures. So going back and then sort of like going into a different branching path, it creates a little bit of conflict with the amount of time that we have to do so. It's a cool idea and somebody should do that. But not immediate plans. That's not to say that it's never going to happen in the future, or at least adapting a little more. I will say there was a really cool idea present in I think Cthulhu Dark does this itself, but it's shit, I forgot the company that makes it, but it's the King of Yellow RPG, where it's this horror RPG, but the entire premise is about playing characters in 3 separate timelines and how those all intersect and connect. Oh, there it is. So this story connects through all three of those timelines, and all of them have changed based on the framework of the time setting that they're in. So doing something like that is like fucking cool. Like, yeah, maybe we'll do that in the future. But it is also worth noting that you can make hacks of liminal horror. We have one from David Garrett. That's This Mortal Coil. That's just for playing necromancers in space. So the framework does work. We have proven that it's adaptive by somebody taking it and making their own little system out of it. You're muted. I don't know if you can hear us.
Pelgrane Press, by the way, can we just point out how cool it is that like the box is the GM screen just magneted around like all of the books?
Oh, holy shit.
Like,
I don't have the physical version. I only have the PDFs. That's nuts.
That's so cool. Okay, so next question. Do you have any advice for making a personal ending emotionally significant enough? And they say, for example, a character is lost because sometimes it could feel disproportionate compared to previous events where characters died.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is comes down to, and this is more advice on like how to run versus like something you would write. Um, there are parts in character generation that talk about how like bonds and like how characters are related to each other, and like from like a friendship standpoint or anything like that, how they're entangled together. And I think that as you go through play and when you're emphasizing not only what's going on, but how the players and the characters are interacting and are impacted by that, and especially in their relationships towards each other, um, I think it's really leveraging and pushing on those sort of connections that can make a very more meaningful moment at the table, that can be on par to character death, right? But again, it comes down to how are your players and how are the characters interacting and relating to each other? Are they making decisions? Are you forcing them to make decisions that put them in conflict with each other, or ways where they have to make sacrifices to help each other? And then just as those bonds strengthen, that gives you more meat to play with. Oh, playing with me, that's a bad phrasing, but more things in which to leverage and pull on. One of the earlier things with the question around how do I with in terms of like slow burn versus like sort of build up, ways in which you entangle and bring the characters closer into the world allows you more options in which to then create tension when those things break.
Yeah, and a lot of this is like we said, it's how more play and how it's experienced at the table than anything you can tangibly write. One of the challenges of being a writer is you don't know who your play groups are going to glom onto. They have their backgrounds. Again, as a writer, we don't know who your future players are going to create for their connections. So it's hard to kind of like tangibly write that into an adventure. But if you play enough adventures, you can start to get an idea of the types of characters that you can introduce into your settings that your players are going to care about. The Bloom is another good one. I'm going to keep talking about this. The Bloom has 4 characters that I'm going to talk about. Just real quick here. The first is the ranger for Camp Coldwater. Their name is Sam. We knew writing this that people would like Sam, and that has proven true. Sam is into cryptids in like an obsessive way. It is this character detail that sort of bubbles out and it makes up their character. So this is the exact type of NPC that we expect players to sort of glom onto, because they're a little weird, because they're super into this one like very specific thing. And it's also a kind of a cool thing while being tangentially related to the potential horrors that come to pass. So we knew Sam would be a well-liked character. And from what we hear, that has come true. So we can play with that. Sam is the ranger of Camp Coldwater. Camp Coldwater is one of the early locations that are claimed by the Bloom. The hint there being that if Sam is present, if the players have not done something to remove Sam from that environment, they're getting taken over by the bloom. Now, we've also driven the players towards investigating Camp Coldwater first. The very impetus of the adventure is that campers have disappeared, and it's something that's kind of it might directly be the reason your investigators have entered this scenario, but it is something that they're going to hear about upon arrival within that first step of the doom clock. So it's only natural. You hear about these campers, you go visit the camp to find out what something's there, then you meet this eccentric character who we have written to be well liked, and then maybe they get infected. So you've already, as a writer, we have built in this natural character loop here to set up that you really like this person, you bond with them for a minute, and then they're gone. We can't guarantee it. You don't have to go to the Coldwater camp. So that is one potential way that we can do it as writers. And it's something that the GM has to bring to life at the table too. We can't just force their hand. So we write who we think are likable characters, hope that the players interact with them in a manner that, is intended so that they do like the characters, and then you can do spooky things with them. Difficult. Not the easiest thing in the world. But in contrast, we can also kind of predict how players are going to respond to other sources. Like I said, there are two other characters I want to talk about, being, Gerald and Hank. These are the two police officers. One's the sheriff, one's a deputy. They're written to be assholes. Gerald specifically is sort of incompetent, and he is incompetent in a way that is going to interact with your player characters. Hank, the sheriff, is not incompetent. Hank is very capable, but Hank is trying to get to retirement and will ignore threats up until the last minute. Both of these characters, again, have written them in such a way that they will cause conflict with the player characters. This is a different type of relationship. You're creating antagonists here that will cause trouble for your player characters in a way that's going to tangibly interact with them. Gerald is present at Camp Coldwater. Gerald will try and stop your characters from investigating the camp, the thing that they're there to do. So you create this moment of tension. So when Gerald is claimed, if he becomes claimed by the growing horror, there is this different sort of emotional connection to it. You don't like this guy. So the horror happening to him, maybe not so bad, you didn't have to deal with him directly. But again, we've established this a relationship, and then the course of the adventure, the tension that's building is kind of like dealing with that directly. Hank, as a character, you have a very similar arc. Hank is a very useful character. He's a good to have as an ally, but he's going to be difficult to get through and sort of ever present in Coldwater itself as an authoritative force. So you're building this relationship up to be inherently adversarial, even if it doesn't have to be. But then we have the fourth character I want to talk about just real quick, how we set them up. It's Cassandra. Cassandra is basically the general manager of the Coldwater Cafe. The central location in which we encourage people to begin their adventures. Cassandra has a couple of interesting things going on with her that's not worth explaining here, but just that we are setting up, again, another really likable character in a central role in a place that the player characters will return to because they need to attend to their base needs, namely food and water. So we set up a prime location. We set up a character to be likable, to create this inherent sense of relationship there. So they will care about this person that sits in the diner in Coldwater, the very last place to be claimed as all the horrors descend around it. And then we put that character in jeopardy by making Coldwater the potential to be claimed as well. So you're sort of setting up central locations, making characters to be likable, hoping that the players will like them, and then putting those characters in danger. And you've got like a little bit of an arc right there. It's not always going to work. We know it's not going to work. People might not clomb onto these characters in the way that we intend to, but that doesn't really matter in the end. They're going to form relationships if they interact with the characters, good or bad. And so you do what you can to set them up, and then you kind of have to discover it through play. So there's only so much hand holding you can do as a writer and hope that things happen in a certain way, but in the end, you don't really control it.
And I think another thing from the running perspective, and since this is a horror game, is that everyone is at risk. every character is on the table. And that also can be sort of liberating from the running standpoint, is that as characters, as your players build those connections to those NPCs or their associates or each other, those are then tools for you to create tension with. Um, and some of the best moments tends to be where you put those NPCs at risk or something happens to them. Because if you think about what drives your players or your characters, the investigators, a lot of times putting the risk of someone they care about is a major impetus for why they would go forward.
Nice.
How many more questions do we have?
I mean, so maybe one or two that are like pretty specific, and then I got a bunch that are kind of more broad.
I think we're already about
Want to hit
two.
the specifics?
Let's do the specifics and see where things end up. Maybe we cut off after then, but we'll kind of see how much we ramble.
Okay. All right. So Jack Edward in the Discord asked two questions. The first, you've addressed already, but I'll just say it to get to the second. It says, it seems liminal horror adventures are largely bounded environments, like the Bureau and the Mall. They use compressors like time and space. They asked, do you think it's important ingredient of liminal horror adventures? You specifically addressed that in the presentation. The second question for that, though, was, do you think there are new considerations and problems made by more open game worlds and less urgent timelines, and how would you design for that?
Yeah, it's fucking hard. So the big problem is, again, we have to ask that question. What is stopping the investigators from leaving? And so when we create these confined bound locations, that is sort of ever present. We're doing that because we don't have a better answer, to be frank. It's keeping the location constrained creates the situation in which the investigator has to act. Now, we didn't do that really in the Bloom. The Bloom does have its constraints. You are playing within this town. The road does wash out. That does make it a little hard to leave, but that's not the only way to leave town. You're sort of, you are able to do so by wandering through the forest, which is dangerous, or getting out on the lake and leaving through one of the tributaries that, drains outward from the lake. So there are ways to leave this location. So this is what we can kind of use as our example for one of the open spots. Players can go at any time. There is less of a constraint here. You're able to go wherever you want. So how do you keep things focused? It's through character motivation. If your characters aren't motivated to push forward, to continue to explore the adventure, then you sort of lost the plot. I don't know, to be frank about that. Where being constrained makes that easy. You don't need to be invested in the horror. You can be invested in getting the fuck out of there. That's the thing with the Bureau. The Bureau, we built in some ways to get characters invested, and I'll talk about that in just a second there. But the primary purpose of the Bureau is you're trapped in this building, and if you do not address the horror, one, you won't get out, and two, the horror is going to leave the building and infect the city. The Mall is pulled into another dimension entirely, so there's no leaving that. That is very much bound and constrained. But so establishing character motivation is key. This is something that happens in the module and happens at the table. As players, as GMs, you have to have characters that are motivated to push forward. That is the social contract for horror. They can't just leave. They need to have some form of direction, some goal, some tangible thing that they're after. We've done that on a mechanical level through the archetypes. Both the Bureau and the Bloom have a list of archetypes. I'll talk about what that means in a second. We've got a different framing for Hungry Hollow that plays with a similar space, but that's just note that that's going to be changed a little bit. So archetypes are seeded character backgrounds that we've written into the adventures that people can use when they're creating new characters. What they do is they give you a little bit of information about who your character may have been in the past. You get to decide who they are now, and it gives you a few items. the key here, those archetypes, they build in character motivations right from the start. So I will read a few from the Bloom, where number 12 is the horror Helmer. You sold the script for the next great slasher, but the studio wants a filming location locked down before the next meeting or the film will be tabled. On paper, Coldwater is perfect considering your shoestring budget. So a 360 camera, you get a script, a light meter, and a bunch of rental agreements. The horror Helmer here, just that character alone is now motivated. Their core goal is to sell their movie script, or they're going to go, basically get kicked out of the business because they haven't, produced the film. They're motivated to now explore. You have to go to these locations. You have to get those contracts signed so you can film your movie. As the horror happens, maybe you start filming that horror. Maybe that's your movie. Maybe Coldwater was perfect. So you have this base thing that starts play. I need to go to these locations in order to do this. This is my character motivation. And then it spirals outward into something that changes over the course of play. In another one, I'll just leave it at the second one here for the purpose of representation. The second is going to be number 2 on the list, the prodigal child. It's as a child, you spent your summers here in your family's cabin by the lake. It's been 10 years since your last visit. This isn't the town you'll remember. You gain an outdated guidebook, a rusted set of keys, and an old fishing rod. So this character has an intrinsic connection to Coldwater. This is based in their childhood, based in their nostalgia. This character does not want Coldwater to be destroyed because it meant something to them, even if the town has changed. So they might know some of the people there, they might know some of the locations, but the key is that there is some connection to this location that keeps them pushing forward to defeat the horror that lies at its heart. And you can extrapolate outward from there. You don't need archetypes. Archetypes are fun. We like writing them. That's primarily why we keep doing it. But that is a way to build inherent character motivation, to keep your character moving, even in these massive open settings. You build that into play, you set the players up so that they have something to work with immediately, and then things can be kind of focused from there. Oh, you're muted.
God fucking damn it. So, Echo Fox in chat asked, the Tomb of Horrors talk got me thinking about Funhouse dungeons and whether they could be done as horror comedy rather than straight horror. Do you think it would be possible to make the genre work in liminal horror?
I think so. There's a lot of humor at the table. I think the humor gives moments of respite before things get really gnarly. There's a fine line, right, in terms of like writing horror comedy, right? And I would then just say write the horror scenario, and then people tend to infuse their style anyways. I think a really good example of film that is both funny and horror would be the Evil Dead series, right? Evil Dead 1, Evil Dead 2. The originals, they're all great. Evil Dead has never missed, but that sort of brevity in those moments, I think bring a lot to the table. But I would personally tend to write things pretty straight in terms of me generating something for others, and it gets infused through the situation and through the table.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care what game you're playing, your players will never miss a dick joke.
Yeah. And, humor is inherently part of horror. Even beyond like the schlock, like the B horror and all that stuff that's intentionally trying to be a little bit goofy. It's the juxtaposition against the thing that we as a viewer find inherently humorous and the things that are actually horrifying that makes for good horror. Not every horror scenario is going to be humor filled, but I think there's a lot of space for it, especially if you're playing with a group that's less serious. The one example that sticks in my brain is I think it's one of the Friday the 13th movies, but there's this scene where Jason's coming back, or the killer, if I'm getting the details wrong, and I think he's going to his old home, and there are squatters who have taken over. And in classic horror tropes, they're fucking. Uh, so Jason goes and kills the dude, then walks into the room where the chick is with a sheet over his head as a ghost with a pair of glasses on it before walking up and killing her. It's like, it's such an absurd moment where it's inherently terrifying because it's murder that's happening there for an unstoppable person killing everyone, but he's committed to the bit. He's got the joke. He put the fucking sheet on with glasses and he's going to kill this person. So it's like, it's such an absurd moment in this otherwise serious movie. And it's for the audience. It's to wink at the audience. So you can have your horror and your comedy. They're not incongruous with each other. It's really just the mood you want to set at the table and the experience you're looking to have.
Cool. Did you want to wrap with that, or did you want me to keep going as far as the questions go?
Let's do one more. We're
Okay.
just at about at our
Choose
time
your
about
favorite one.
Oh, my favorite one? That's like an hour-long discussion. Let's see. I have a very short one. If you can give a short answer, but you're a member of the podcast, so that's not possible. Let's see here. So Aaron King had a lot of really, really great questions. I would say two-parter, and pick the part if you want to ask it. They asked, what parts of Liminal Horror feel essential to you so that you'd make another system bin around them, and what parts of other systems or supplements might feel essential enough to discard Liminal Horror structure in order to adapt them?
the long way there. All right, so I'll start. Essential parts of Liminal Horror.
I told you it was going to be.
Yeah, you're going to have to remind me what that part 2 is. Essential part of Liminal Horror is Fallout. That's the thing that is unique. That is the thing that makes it, click at the table. I have ripped Fallout out, and it's in every one of my the odd games now. It's such an easy way to just reinforce your character trope. You're literally changing as this horror is happening to you beyond the fact that your character might die. So that's easy enough. Beyond that, Liminal Horror does a couple of fun things with the framework there, but we've seen the Into the Odd and the Karen framework apply to a whole bunch of different things. It's really just that Fallout that makes it like unique at the table and how that interacts with the themes of the system and the adventures and all that stuff. So super easy to take that and carry that through. It's just, bad things happen to your character.
What I always find interesting about Liminal Horror, and I don't know if this is a framing that you guys necessarily meant or if you've discussed already, that Liminal Horror really doesn't have a lot of advancement per se, but except Fallout. So it's like, it's the only real way to get your characters more power and to go forward, but it's also like bad for you at the same time. So it's a fun kind of like blackjack where it's like get close to going over the edge without going over, and maybe you'll get something that'll help you a little bit. And I find that incredibly interesting as like a very brutal kind of like lateral character advancement.
No, I think that is really at its core. And I think if you line up adventures as not always being the character's first adventure, that also makes more sense than why they would continue doing it. Is it that they want to be weirder? Is it they want to find a way to undo it? Is it like, as you start to string them along campaign style, if you did, there's that inherent drive built into it because they have already taken the step in. How can I go do my office job and have that black halo hanging over my head, right? Like, or you have then fully committed to, whether you chose to or not, sort of going down this path. And I think that is very interesting. I think it's fun, and then tying, it allows you to really pull from such great media and genre examples to like explore and play with, which I think is fun because a lot of you think of how those movies end. Oftentimes it ends with that moment for the characters, like it doesn't go into it, but that reflecting on what happened. And there's that sort of sense of like they are different. Either they're covered in blood or like this or that, like they are different than how they started in that first frame of the movie, right? When she's riding in the back of the truck after escaping in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right? And she's just there covered in blood, like hysterically crying slash sort of almost screaming, and you got the sunspots going on, and like that character has changed because of the events, and like that's what Fallout in a sense sort of does.
So was that second part of the question, what would we take from other systems to bring to Liminal Horror or something like that?
Yeah, what parts of other systems or supplements might feel essential enough to discard Liminal Horror's structure in order to adapt them? Like, is there a system you could think of that might be adventure, like DCC, for example? Is there any part of that system where you might want to adapt an adventure and you might tweak Liminal Horror's system in order to adapt that adventure?
In this very short answer, like yes, and do it right. Like the mall, I sort of did that with the whisper cards, whether it's success or not. Like I think that what's nice about the Horror and that structure of the Into the Odd is like you really can adapt it to like you could add new mechanics specifically for to reinforce a specific adventure, right? We play around with that a little bit with different appendices of like modular rules you could add. That's a really nice thing that that framework does is it allows you to like adapt it. So I think if there was a mechanic that you're like, this is really going to work for this adventure, but it's not in the core rules, I think you go ahead and you just slap that shit on. And you lead it with the front and be like, this is either like you lay it out very specifically at the start of those sessions, like you can play this differently. It's almost like playing a different genre of horror, right? And different genres of horrors have different rules to them. And so sometimes those rules, if it's in the TTRPG, is just a mechanical change that you would just play slightly differently.
Yeah, and realistically, I've got like 6 billion things that are kind of stewing in the background. So I have been toying with this very concept while working on it's a potential future, nothing that we've committed to, but this idea that I'm calling Southern Gothic horror, which is sort of taking the framework of liminal horror and applying it to a very specific genre, as opposed to sort of like the general, horror gist that we're trying to hit here. So I've been tinkering with a few things. So I've got some specific examples of stuff that might creep into the design. The first is very funny because it's also called Fallout. From Heart, the City Beneath, it has this system where Fallout targets each of your stats. So if we were going to excise this from Liminal Horror, it'd be to take out wounds entirely and add everything as Fallout now. I don't think that that lends to the genre that we're trying to hit, the sort of wider net. It's much more appropriate to have wounds than Fallout is the way that Heart does that. But for something a little more specific, that's something I would recommend looking into is, seeing if you can unify the system and everything is a Fallout now, as opposed to like strict, body horror, like your arms getting chopped off. Maybe something happens that changes you in other ways. But the other one I had in mind would be to completely cut out archetype and character backgrounds in lieu of something like Troubles from Orbital Blues. For the uninformed, Troubles, what they do is Orbital Blues uses this mechanic called blues, which is your character getting real sad because they're a sad space cowboy. But the troubles are your past coming to haunt your character in ways that you didn't necessarily expect. Your trouble will present you a series of questions. You answer a couple of them at character creation, and then the rest during play. As you are answering your questions and detailing your character, and you're learning who this person is, what makes them tick, what part of their past haunts them, and how this changes over the course of play. You're gaining blues, and blues feed into the system's mechanical character progression up until the point where they address the source of their trouble in a direct manner. And then that's how the character grows mechanically and as like tangible character growth. They address the source of their trouble. They figured out a way how to move on, move past it bothering them. And then some other trouble crops up and they have to deal with that. But finding a way to kind of apply that more into liminal horror has been sort of a quest of mine as of late, or more of like musing when I'm sitting in bed with nothing better to do. But it is Troubles lay out a potential character progression path for each of your characters. And so finding a way to seed that loosely would be very interesting and worth dropping parts of liminal horror core for, depending on your scenario. Maybe you don't want to, maybe you don't care about emotions in your play sessions.
Yeah, who needs emotions, you know? Discard those. It's a fallout of life, actually. Did you want to keep going with questions, or did you want to?
No. My
Okay.
bladder's about to explode, so I gotta run to the bathroom.
Okay. 1 second. I'm gonna discard this. And... jump to this screen. We're back. So, to kind of wrap up here, first of all, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. I hope this becomes a series that's been extremely enlightening, and I really, really appreciate you guys. You know, I mean, friends of the show, member of the show, like everything here. Really appreciate you guys coming on and doing this with us. So, thank you, first of all.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It would have been a giant pain in the butt to set this up without you.
So back to our 3-person screen in the corners here, we have the Twisted Classics Liminal Horror Jam kind of graphic there, and then the Parthenogenesis of Hungry Hollow. Google the word Parthenogenesis if you would like to. That's a fun word. Do you guys want to just give a little bit of info on those real quick? I know we touched on it a little bit, but how long is the Twisted Classics Jam going for? When does Hungry Hollow drop? I know you said a date previously. And then yeah.
Yeah, so Twisted Classics is on right now. It's for people to write their own third-party modules, monsters. It's pretty open in terms of like scope too. So if you're like, I've never done a whole adventure before, you could start off small, but it's a way for you to adapt sort of classic, and classic being something you just really care about, and put it into sort of a modern horror presentation. For Hungry Hollow, the Parthenogenesis of Hungry Hollow, that is going to be launching on BackerKit June 3rd, I believe. It's going to be our first hardcover. It is going to be both in size and sort of style, setting the groundwork going forward for the deluxe edition and adventures going forward. It has amazing art throughout it. It's a really cool adventure. I've got to run it twice, and both times were some of my more favorite sessions I've ever had. And that's not just patting myself on the own back. It's just a lot of fun. It's really gross. It's really weird. It takes all the parts that were really cool about N1 and then threw flesh bees and other things too into it. And so just open it and be, I hope you don't have tryptophobia, because that's definitely a thing that's throughout it. Major content warning for that. And if you go onto the backer kit too, there's content warnings because there's a lot of different themes and things going on that can be pretty gnarly. And so just leading those at the forefront, but it's a lot of fun. It's a really social module because you're really interacting with this town as you start to realize what's going on, and realize that some people are acting really strange and really, really into the baby shower that's coming up. Nothing bad could happen there, I promise.
Good times. So once again, thank you for coming on. Definitely check those out if you're watching, or if you're watching, you can also check it out on podcast. If you're listening, you can also watch the presentation over on YouTube. I'll make sure all the links are down in the descriptions, and I'll make sure the links to the Twisted Classics Jam and to the backer kit for Parthenogenesis of Hungry Hollow are down there as well as any other links we think are appropriate based on the presentation and stuff. Anything else, or are we wrapping the first first of a series for the Liminal Horror Writing Seminar?
I think that's about it. I do want to shout out that at the moment, the current plan to come back for a second of these seminars is to focus on playtesting. Do a little bit of a talk at the start, talk about how to go about playtesting, and then host a live playtest on this channel here. But if you want to see further writing seminars, please put them in the chat of the YouTube video or come to the Liminal Horror server and shout out what you want to see. We have no firm plans for a third one. Maybe we'll do that before the end of the jam. It really depends on the interests of the folk and what they have specific questions on, or whether or not we think it's worth dedicating 2.5 hours to.
Pushing 3 now, but you guys are perpetually welcome to do anything you want, and we will always try to make work here as best we can here on the show. We love Liminal Horror, we love both of you guys, and it's been a pleasure to be able to be a part of this with you. So again, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for hosting us.
And that'll be it, everyone. Thank you so much in chat for participating, drop the questions and everything. We'll drop a link to the Discord as well, so you can check these guys out. And everyone have a wonderful day.